Park Ranger Files back again. The submissions box has been full this month, so tonight is a long one. Remember, these are your accounts and your words, lightly read aloud. I'll stay out of the way. Here we go. Story 1. I've put off writing this for the better part of 9 years, so forgive me if it comes out crooked. My wife is the one who finally talked me into sending it in. She says I tell it the same way every time, like I've worn a groove into it, and maybe that's true. Maybe if I write it down, it'll stop being something I have to keep handling. She also says, and she's not wrong, that a man my age ought to have something better to do with his evenings than sit on the porch staring at a tree line. So this is me trying to do something with it, setting it down so I can maybe set it down for good. My name's Dale. I'm 61 now, and I worked timber most of my life up in the mountains east of where I grew up, which I'd rather keep to myself. Cutting, hauling, surveying lots before a sale. By the time this happened, I'd been walking those ridges for 30-some years, and there wasn't a stretch of woods in 3 counties I couldn't have found my way out of blindfolded. That matters for what comes next, so I'm putting it up front. I am not a man who gets turned around. I'm not a man who spooks. Ask anybody who knew me. I've spent nights out in weather that killed lesser prepared men, and I slept fine. I've had a bear come through a camp, and I rolled over and went back to sleep. The woods never once scared me in 50 years. I tell you that so you'll understand the size of what I'm about to tell you, because it takes a great deal to scare a man like the man I used to be. And what happened in those woods scared me out of the only life I'd ever known. Let me set the scene proper, because the details turned out to matter to me. The way I keep turning them over. It was October. The good part of October when the maples have gone, but the oaks are still hanging on red, and the air's got that first real bite to it in the mornings. I'd taken a contract to mark a parcel for a fellow who'd bought it sight unseen, the way some of these out-of-state buyers do. And he wanted to know what he actually owned before the snow came. Maybe 400 acres of mixed hardwood with a creek splitting it. Easy work for good money. I told him 2 days and I meant it. I'd done 100 jobs just like it. You walk the deed lines and you mark the corners and the boundaries with paint and ribbon. You note anything worth noting. Merchantable timber, a spring, a wet spot, an old home site if there is one. It's solitary work, and I always liked it best of all the work I did. Just me in the woods and a job with a clear beginning and end. The buyer's name I'll leave out, but he had a nephew, a young fellow named Carl, who had been up to the property once or twice and who told me he might drive up the second day to meet me and have a look at where one of the corners fell, because there was some question about a fence line and a neighbor. I tell you about Carl now because Carl is the reason I did what I did, and you need to understand that going in. The first day was nothing. I marked the eastern boundary, all of it, a long day's work, brush thick in places, but nothing I hadn't handled 1,000 times. I ate my lunch on a flat rock by the creek, watched a pileated woodpecker work a dead snag for the better part of 20 minutes. Big, handsome bird, red crest, going at that snag like he had a grudge against it. I want you to understand how ordinary it was. It was a good day. The creek was running clear and cold, and I drank from it, which you can still do back in there. And I marked my corners clean, and I drove home that evening whistling with the windows down. I told my wife it was the kind of easy money you feel almost guilty taking. I slept like a stone. The second day is the one I keep. I started before light because I wanted the cool hours for the steep section. There's a place on that parcel where the land folds up sharp, a north-facing slope so thick with mountain laurel, you have to turn sideways to get through it in spots. Laurel hells, the old-timers called them, and if you've never been in one, I'll try to paint it for you. Mountain laurel grows in these dense, interlocking thickets. The trunk's all twisted and woven together, like something made on purpose to keep things out. And when it's grown up thick, you can't walk through it so much as fight through it, ducking and twisting and shoving the branches aside, and they shove back. You can lose a hunting dog in a good laurel hell. Men have died in them. gotten turned around 20 feet from open ground, and never found their way out. I'd been in worse, so I wasn't worried. But I'll admit it's the kind of country that makes you feel small and closed in, even on a bright day. The way the laurel comes up over your head and the light goes green and dim, and you lose your sense of which way is out. I needed to run the boundary up through it because that's where the deed line went, and a job's a job. I got to the bottom of the slope just as the light was coming gray through the trees. Cold morning, my breath showing. I remember standing there a minute looking up into that laurel. The way it climbed the slope, dark and tangled, and having a moment, just a moment, of not wanting to go up into it. I put it down to the early hour and the cold. I'd had that feeling before at the edge of bad brush, and it never meant anything. So up I went, paint can in one hand, ribbon in my pack, fighting up through the laurel the way you do. Sweating despite the cold inside of 5 minutes. The branches grabbing at me, the light going dim and green the higher I climbed into it. I was maybe 300 feet up the slope when I heard my own name, Dale. Clear as anything. A man's voice, low, coming from upslope and a little to my left. Not loud. The kind of voice you use when somebody's close and you don't need to shout. Conversational. Easy. Now, I'll tell you what I did because it's the natural thing. And I want you to know I'm not making myself out to be braver than I was. I answered. I said, yeah? And I started up toward it because in my head it had to be Carl, the buyer's nephew, who'd said he might come up and find me. That was the only person it could have been. Nobody else knew I was up there. Nobody else knew my name. So I climbed toward the voice, thinking about corner pins and fence lines. A little annoyed, if anything, that he'd come up early and was going to slow me down. I even called out, "That you, Carl? Hold on, I'm coming up." And nothing answered that, which I didn't think much of at the time. Sound does funny things on a slope. I figured he hadn't heard me. I got maybe 40 feet, hard feet, fighting up through the laurel the whole way, and it came again. Off to my right this time. "Dale, over here." And here's the part I've never been able to make sense of, the part that turns my stomach to this day. It was a good voice, a friendly voice. It sounded like somebody glad to see me, warm. But there is no way on God's earth a man got from upslope left to downslope right of me in the time it took me to climb 40 feet through laurel I could barely move through myself. I'd have heard him. You cannot move quietly in a laurel hell. It is not possible. You snap and you crash and you swear and you make a racket like a bull going through it. And I make as much racket as anyone. More, I'm a big man. I'd been crashing and snapping the whole way up. And from where that second call came, off to my right and below me, a man would have had to cross 40, 50 feet of the thickest laurel on that slope, right across my path, close enough that I'd have heard every branch. And I heard nothing. Nothing at all. Just the voice. And it had moved all the way across and below me in silence, and it knew my name. I stopped. I stood there in the laurel with my heart starting to come up in my chest, and I called out, "Carl?" And my voice came out smaller than I meant it to. And nothing answered. I stood there a good long while. Long enough that my legs started to ache from bracing on the slope. Long enough that the sweat I'd worked up went cold on me. And while I stood there, I had the strongest feeling I've ever had in my life that something was looking at me and deciding. That's the only word for it. Deciding. Like I was a thing on a shelf and it hadn't made up its mind whether to take me down. I've been watched by animals plenty, you can feel it. A deer in the brush, a bear you haven't seen yet. And it doesn't feel like this felt. An animal watching you is just an animal, wary, wanting to know what you are and whether you mean it harm. This was patient. This was interested. This was a thing weighing me. And underneath it, way down underneath, I had the sense that whatever was doing the weighing was old, was very old, and had weighed a great many men before me on that slope, and that most of the deciding had not gone their way. I know how that sounds. I'm telling you what I felt. The voice came one more time, from directly behind me, where I just climbed up from. where there was nothing but the bent and broken path my own body had made through the brush, where I knew for an absolute certainty no man stood because I had just come up through it and would have walked straight into him. "Dale, come here." Soft, almost kind. "Come here, Dale." Like you'd call a child in for supper. Like you'd call a dog you loved. I didn't go. I want that on the record more than anything else in this letter. I did not go. And I'll tell you, it was the hardest thing I ever did with my own body. Harder than any work I ever put it to. Because every part of me that had been raised polite, that answers when it's called, that goes when a friendly voice says, "Come here," wanted to turn around and walk back down toward that voice. It sounded like home. It sounded like supper. It sounded like a man you'd trust with your truck and your wife and your last dollar. And some other part of me, some older part I didn't know I had until that morning, planted my boots in the dirt of that slope and would not let me move toward it. And the two parts of me stood there at war while that voice waited, patient as the grave, somewhere behind me in the brush I'd just walked through. Then I broke. Not toward it, away. I went sideways. Straight across the slope, the hardest possible way, the way you never go through laurel because it's all against the grain of the growth, tearing through it with my arms up over my face to keep it out of my eyes, going west because west was down off the parcel and towards the logging road and away from that thing, whatever it was. And it called my name while I went. "Dale," from in front of me. "Dale, this way," from in front of me in the exact direction I was running, as if it had gotten ahead of me, as if it were backing up before me, keeping itself always between me and where I was trying to go, hurting me, and still, the whole time, I never heard it move. Not one branch. I was crashing through that laurel like a freight train. I could hardly hear myself think over the noise I was making. And somewhere in front of me, in total silence, a voice that knew my name kept calling me on. Gentle, patient. "This way, Dale, this way. Come on now." I don't know how I didn't fall. I should have fallen a dozen times on that slope going across it like that. I think something was holding me up. And I don't mean anything good. I think the thing was as careful to keep me from getting hurt and stopping as a man is careful with a fish on the line. He doesn't want to lose. I think it wanted me to keep going right where it was steering me. And the only reason I didn't go where it steered, the only reason is that I knew that ground. I knew that even though down felt like the way out, the way it was calling me was a hair too far north and a hair too far north off. That slope took you not to the road but to a long bench of ground that ran back into country that didn't drain anywhere a man would want to be. Deep folded, laurel-choked country where the parcel ended and a great deal of nothing began. And I understood in my gut, the way you understand things when you're past thinking, that it was calling me into the deep of it, and that if I'd been a man who didn't know that ground, I'd have gone gladly, following a friendly voice down what felt like the way home. I came out on the logging road. I came out of the laurel and onto open ground with my shirt torn off one shoulder and blood on my forearms from the brush, and a long scratch down one cheek I didn't even feel till later, and the voice did not follow me out. It stopped at the edge of the laurel. The last I heard of it was one more call from back in the green dark I'd just torn out of. And it didn't sound kind anymore. I'll leave it at that. It didn't sound kind anymore, and I did not slow down to listen, and I did not stop until I was in my truck with the doors locked. And I am a grown man, a hard man, a man who has buried his own father and his own brother dry-eyed, and I sat in that truck and I shook and I cried like a child. There's a thing I found out after that I'll put in because it's the closest I ever came to an answer, though it's no comfort. A few months on, once I could talk about it at all, I went and saw an old fellow I'd known for years, retired from the timber business himself, getting on in his 80s by then, sharp as a tack still. A man who'd cut and surveyed that whole country back before I was born. I told him what happened on that slope. The voice, my name, Carl's name, the way it kept itself between me and the road. And he didn't tell me I was tired or fooled or imagining things. He just listened and got a look on his face. And And when I was done, he was quiet a while. And then he asked me which parcel and which slope. And when I told him, he nodded, slow, like I'd confirmed something he already half knew. He told me there were a few places back in the deep country that the old loggers wouldn't cut, wouldn't bid on, wouldn't mark, wouldn't take a crew into, and wouldn't say why to a young man who asked. The same way my daddy wouldn't say why about some things. Just, we don't work that ground. And he said that north slope, the laurel hill I'd been marking, was one of them. That in his day it had a kind of quiet understanding around it, that you didn't go up in there, and that the understanding had faded out as the old men died off and the new buyers came in from out of state, who didn't know and didn't ask and hired men like me who didn't know either. He said the men of his father's time had a saying about that kind of ground, that it knew your name before you got there and would say it back to you to get you to come, and that the only men who came back out of such places were the ones who didn't answer, or who answered and then had the sense to run the wrong way on purpose. He looked right at me when he said that last part. The ones who ran the wrong way on purpose. And I understood he meant me, running sideways across that slope against the grain of the laurel, away from the way that felt like home, and that in his old way of knowing, that was the thing that saved me, the running wrong on purpose, and that some part of me had known to do it because some part of me, way down, still carried the old knowledge even though nobody'd ever told it to me in words. He's gone now too, that old man. Most of the ones who knew the old ground are gone, and that's part of why I'm sending this in, I suppose. The knowing is dying out, the quiet understandings about which slopes you don't go up, and there's nobody left to tell the out-of-state buyers and the young men they hire. And so I'll tell whoever's reading this instead. There are places that know your name before you get there. If you ever hear yours called, friendly, from up a dark slope where nobody could know it, that's the place telling you it's ready for you. Don't answer. And if you do answer, run wrong on purpose. Run the hard way against the grain toward the road. It's the running wrong that brings you home. Carl, the real Carl, never came that day. I found out later he'd had truck trouble and never made it up the mountain at all. So whatever called me by my name and my friend's name up on that slope, it was not Carl, and it was not any living man, and I have never come up with a third thing it could have been that I can stand to think about for very long. I never finished marking that parcel, and I called the buyer that night and told him I couldn't do it and to find somebody else, and I wouldn't tell him why. And he was sore about it and threatened not to pay me for the first day's work. And I told him, keep it, keep all of it, and hung up. I never took another job in those woods, nor in any deep woods after that. I retired earlier than I'd planned. My wife and I get by. We get by fine. People want me to explain it, the few I've told. My brother, before he passed, said it was an echo, that voices do funny things on a north slope, that I'd been up before dawn and was tired and my mind filled in the rest. I've thought about all that. Lord knows I've thought about it, 9 years of thinking about it. And I'll grant you the woods can fool a man. Sound bends and bounces. A far thing sounds near. Your own pulse in your ears sounds like footsteps. I know all that. I've been fooled by the woods plenty in 50 years, and I always figured it out after and laughed about it. But I want whoever's reading this to understand the two things that no echo theory has ever gotten around. The two things I'd put my hand on a Bible over. An echo doesn't know your name, and an echo doesn't get ahead of you between you and the road and keep itself there, steering you the wrong way home, going quiet and kind right up until the moment it loses you. I don't go in the woods anymore. I've made my peace with that mostly. I sit on my porch and I look at them, the ridges going blue into the distance the way they do in the evening, the country I loved my whole life and gave my whole working life to. I love it still, I do, but from here, from the porch. That's close enough now. That's as close as I go. Thank you for reading my story. Telling it doesn't fix it, but my wife was right. It helps to set it down. Maybe somebody out there has heard their own name called in a place where no one knew it, in a voice they trusted, calling them somewhere they had no business going. If you have, I hope to God you did what I did. I hope you knew your ground, and if you didn't know it, if you weren't sure, I hope you went sideways anyway, the hard way, against the grain, toward the road and not the voice. The voice is never your friend out there. I don't care how much it sounds like one. Go sideways, go toward the road, come home. A quick word, call to action 1 of 3. If you're enjoying these, the best thing you can do for the channel is hit subscribe and leave the video playing while you go about your evening. It honestly helps more than you'd think. And if you've got a story of your own, the submissions email is in the description. We read every single one, even the ones we can't use. All right, back to it. Story 2. Hi. So I'm not really a writer, and I've started this email like 4 times, so I'm just going to type it the way I'd say it out loud. And you can fix it up however you want, or not, whatever. Sorry in advance if it's a mess. I'm 24. Last fall, me and 3 friends did a section of trail for my friend Becca's birthday, because she'd never camped and she wanted to before she turned 25, which is a whole thing about her dad that I won't get into, except to say he passed when she was a kid, and there was this list of stuff he'd wanted to do with her that they never got to, and camping was on it, and turning 25 felt significant to her because of how old he was when, anyway. I said I wouldn't get into it. The point is, it mattered to her a lot this trip, way more than a normal birthday thing. And that's part of why we all said yes, even though only one of us really knew what we were doing. 4 of us, me, Becca, her girlfriend Sam, and this guy Theo, who's kind of the only one of us who actually knew anything about being outdoors. Theo's the friend of a friend who became an actual friend, you know the type, the one who has the gear and the knowledge, and gets invited to things specifically, so the trip doesn't end in disaster. Without Theo, I think we'd have died on day 1, honestly. Not even joking. We were out 3 nights. The first 2 were genuinely some of the best days of my life, and I'm not just saying that because of what happened after. I want to actually describe them, because I don't want this to just be the scary part. The whole trip mattered. We laughed so much my face hurt. Sam brought this tiny speaker and we had a whole soundtrack going while we hiked. Becca cried at the first big view, like really cried, and we all pretended not to notice to let her have it. And then she made a joke about it and we all lost it. We saw a black bear way down a valley that didn't care about us at all, just flipping logs looking for grubs, and Theo talked us through it all calm, told us it didn't want anything to do with us, and watching it was honestly magical. The second night we found the spot with no light pollution and the stars were insane. More stars than I'd ever seen, the actual Milky Way, and we just lay there in a row looking up, and Becca said something about her dad that I'm not going to repeat because it's hers, but it made all 4 of us cry and then laugh, and it was perfect. It was genuinely perfect. I need you to know it was perfect before I tell you the rest. The third night is the one I need to tell you about, and I've gone back and forth on whether it even counts as scary or if we're all just idiots. But it's been bugging me for months, so here it is. We camped in this little gap between 2 rises. Not a designated site, which I know now you're maybe not supposed to do, but Theo said it was fine, that it was flat and dry and out of the wind, and we weren't near any water source we'd contaminate and we'd leave no trace. Theo was very serious about all of it, the whole leave no trace thing, the bear stuff, all of it. And we made fun of him for being so intense, and he just took it. He's used to being the responsible one, I think. We did the whole bear thing, right? Cooked away from the tents, cleaned up everything, food and toothpaste and anything smellable into the bag. Bag hung up a tree way far from where we slept. Theo made us watch him do it and explained the whole counterbalance thing, and we were like, yeah, Theo, great. And he was like, no, this matters, and he was right that it mattered, just not for the reason any of us were thinking about. I woke up sometime in the night because Becca was shaking my shoulder. We were sharing a tent, the 2 of us, Sam and Theo in the other one. And the thing about Becca is she's loud. She's a loud person. It's like her defining trait. It's why we love her. She's got this huge laugh you can hear across a parking lot. And she talks with her whole body. And she was being so quiet, so completely silent, just shaking my shoulder with her hand clamped over her own mouth. That alone, the wrongness of quiet Becca, scared me more than anything before I even knew what was happening. She didn't say a word. She just pointed at the tent wall, at the side facing out down the gap. There was a light. Out past the tents, down the gap, maybe a couple 100 feet off. A warm light, yellow-orange, low to the ground, the color and the size of a campfire or a big lantern. And my first reaction, my actual first thought, before my brain caught up, was relief, like, oh, good, other campers, no big deal, we're not as alone out here as we thought. That's genuinely where my head went first, because that's the normal thing a light in the dark means. People. But then my brain caught up, and Becca's already awake brain had clearly already gotten there, which is why she was so scared. And here's what got us. We'd hiked through that entire gap that afternoon, the whole thing. There had been nobody, no tents, no people, no sign anybody had been there in a long time. And more than that, you don't just walk into a spot in the pitch black, in country with no trail down that gap, and get a fire going without a sound. We'd have heard people arriving. We'd have heard voices, footsteps, gear, the snap and pop of a fire getting started, somebody coughing, anything. And we'd heard nothing. I'd slept through nothing because there'd been nothing to sleep through. The light was just there, fully formed, completely silent. And it wasn't flickering, that's the thing. That's the thing I keep coming back to, and I'll probably mention it again. Because it's the part that won't leave me alone. A fire flickers. That's just what fire does, it's never still. It jumps and breathes and throws shadows that move. A lantern flickers too, a little. A flame in a lantern still moves. And even an electric one, you'd see bugs crossing it or branches moving in front of it. This light did not move, at all. It was a steady, solid, unwavering orange glow, the exact warm color of firelight sitting in the dark down the gap. And it did not flicker or jump or breathe or change in any way the entire time. And once you noticed that, you could not unnotice it, and it made the back of my neck go cold in a way I have never felt before or since. I got Theo. I unzipped our tent as quietly as I could, which felt incredibly loud. And I crawled over to the other tent, and I woke Theo up with my hand on his shoulder and a finger to my lips when he opened his eyes. Theo's the calm one, remember? Theo's the one who watched a bear with us and narrated it like a nature documentary. And I watched Theo look out at that light for a long time, way longer than it should take to look at a light without saying anything. And I watched the calm go out of his face. And that scared me worse than the light did. Because if the light didn't bother Theo, I could have told myself it was nothing, but it bothered Theo. A lot. And then Theo said very quietly, very evenly, in a voice with all the warmth pressed out of it, "Get Sam up. We're going to pack, and we're going to leave, and we're not going to talk, and nobody's going to look at it. Don't look at it. Just pack." That's when I got really scared. Don't look at it. Because Theo doesn't say things like that. Theo says things like, "You've got plenty of daylight," and "Drink more water." Theo does not say, "Don't look at the light." We broke camp in the dark in, I think, under 10 minutes, which if you've ever tried to pack a tent in the dark with shaking hands, is basically impossible. But it turns out fear is a hell of a drug and a hell of a motivator. We didn't talk, we barely breathed. Sam woke up confused and scared, and Theo just kept her moving with little touches and gestures. The whole time, that light just sat there. It didn't come closer, it didn't go away. It didn't grow or shrink or move or flicker. It just sat there, steady and orange and silent. And I swear to you, and I know a light can't do this, but I swear it felt like it was watching us. Like it knew we'd seen it. Like it was waiting to see what we'd do. There was a horrible patience to it. The hardest part was the food bag. It was hung up a tree closer to the light than the tents were, off in that direction. And getting it meant walking toward the light, maybe 40 feet closer to it. And I watched Theo stand at the bottom of that tree looking at the light, And you could see him doing the math, the food, the bear safety, the whole reason we'd hung it, against walking even one step closer to that thing. And he left it. Theo, who'd lectured us for 10 minutes about that exact bag, left it hanging in the tree and walked away from it, and that told me everything about how scared he was, because Theo abandoning the leave no trace principles meant Theo had decided there were worse things in those woods that night than a fed bear. We hiked out by headlamp on a section of trail you were absolutely not supposed to hike at night, over terrain that was genuinely dangerous in the dark. And we did the dumbest, most objectively dangerous thing of the whole trip. A real risk of a twisted ankle, or worse, miles from help, to get away from a light that never actually did anything to us. And I know how that sounds, I know. Looking back on the actual physical risk, leaving was crazy. But not one of us, not even after ever once questioned that leaving was right. Every single one of us, including calm, rational Theo, knew in our bodies that we had to get away from that light, and we were all four of us in complete wordless agreement about it. And that kind of total animal consensus has to count for something. We didn't look back at it. Theo's rule: we just hiked, fast and scared, until the gap was way behind us. And only when we were over the rise and couldn't have seen it anymore, even if we'd turned, did Theo let us slow down. When we got back to the cars at like 4 a.m, exhausted, scratched up, adrenaline crashed, Theo finally talked. And I'm going to tell you what he said, because it's stuck with me as much as the light has. He said his grandfather guided in these mountains his whole life, that the outdoor stuff Theo knew he mostly knew from his grandpa, and that his grandpa had told him exactly one thing that wasn't practical, that wasn't about knots or weather or water. Exactly one thing that was. Theo's word: superstitious. And the thing was this: if you see a light in the woods at night, and you didn't make it, and you can't hear the people who did, you do not go toward it, and you do not let it see you being curious about it, and you do not let it know you're afraid of it either. You just gather your people and you leave, calm like it's nothing, like you didn't even really notice it. Theo said his grandfather was the most practical, least superstitious man he ever knew in his life. A man who laughed at ghost stories, and that this was the only thing like it. The man ever said, and that he said it more than once over the years, unprompted, always serious. So Theo had always figured the old man meant it, had maybe seen something himself he never explained. And Theo said that standing at the edge of that gap, looking at that light that didn't flicker, his grandfather's voice came back to him so strong it was almost like the old man was standing next to him, saying it again, and that's why he got us out. Nothing happened. I want to be really honest about that, because I don't want to oversell this. We're all completely fine. Nothing chased us, nothing touched us. The light never moved. Maybe it was poachers with some weird setup. Maybe it was some guy with an unusual lantern who liked his solitude and was as freaked out by us as we were by him. Maybe we collectively panicked and put ourselves in real physical danger over absolutely nothing. 4 scared kids and one spooked grandfather's voice. That's a completely reasonable read of the whole thing, and I can't prove it wrong. But I keep coming back to 2 things. The first is that it didn't flicker, not once, the entire time. This fire-colored light. That wasn't a fire, because fires move and this didn't. And the second is the food bag. We left a hung food bag in those woods, the one thing Theo cared most about, because the direction it hung was the direction of the light. And somewhere out there, that bag probably hung in that tree for weeks, and I've thought about it a lot. That bag hanging there in the dark, down the gap, a little closer to where the light had been, and I've thought about whether the light was ever interested in our food at all, or in something else, and I've decided I'm glad we never found out, and I've decided I'm never going to camp in an undesignated spot again as long as I live. One last thing, because it's bugged me, and I figure if I'm telling the whole thing, I should tell this part too. A few weeks after we got back, I tried to find out if anyone else had seen anything weird out there. I'm a researcher at heart, I guess. Or just couldn't let it go, so I went looking online, hiking forums for that area, trip reports, anything. And I didn't find anything about our exact spot, which honestly was a relief. But I did find this one old thread, people swapping stories about that general stretch of country, and there were a couple of posts buried in it from different people who didn't know each other, talking about seeing a steady light in the woods at night out there, off in the distance, fire-colored. And every single one of them, separately, mentioned the same thing without prompting. The thing none of them could explain, and that had stuck with them the way it stuck with me, that it didn't flicker. One guy wrote that he'd convinced himself it was a campfire until he realized he'd been staring at it for 10 minutes, and it hadn't moved or changed at all. And that something about that, the not flickering, made him so uneasy he packed up and moved his camp in the dark. Reading that from a total stranger years before our trip, describing the exact same wrong detail I'd seen with my own eyes, the not flickering, was somehow worse than the night itself, because it meant it wasn't just us. It meant it's out there, the light that holds too still, and it's been out there a long time. And other people have seen it and felt the exact same animal wrongness and gotten away from it the exact same way. And Theo's grandfather's rule isn't just one old man's superstition. It's a thing enough people have needed that it keeps getting independently rediscovered by scared campers staring at a light that won't flicker. Becca wants to go again next year. Becca, who I love, who got the camping trip she wanted for her dad, who now has the best birthday story of anyone we know and tells it at parties and laughs that big laugh of hers about it, wants to go back out there. I said I'd think about it. I'm still thinking about it. I'll probably go because it's Becca and because 2 of those 3 nights were the best of my life. But I'm making Theo come. And I'm not camping anywhere we can't see all the way around us. And if I ever see a light in the woods at night that I didn't make and can't hear, I already know exactly what I'm going to do, because Theo's grandfather told Theo, and Theo told me, and now I'm telling you. You don't go toward it. You gather your people, and you leave like it's nothing, and you don't look back. Story 3. To the Park Ranger Files inbox. My grandson set up this email account for me and showed me how to send things to you. So if the formatting is wrong, that's on him and not me. He's a good boy. He's the one who got me watching your videos in the home here. Several of us watched them in the common room of an evening. We are quite the fan club. You'd be surprised. A room full of old folks gathered around the television your channel playing, and a more appreciative audience you will not find anywhere. Because at our age, we have all of us got a story or two, and it does us good to hear that the world is still strange and that not everything has been explained and tidied away. The young people think they know everything now. We know better. We lived longer. I'm 88 years old. I tell you that not for sympathy, but so you'll understand that what I'm about to tell you happened a very long time ago, in the late 1940s, when I was a girl of perhaps 12, and that I have carried it the entire time, every day of a long life, and that I'm one of the last people alive who remembers it at all. And when I'm gone, there'll be no one. My mother and father are long gone. I had no brothers or sisters. The few who might have heard it secondhand are gone too. That is the real reason I'm writing. The true reason underneath the rest. Not to frighten anybody, and goodness knows not for attention. I've had quite enough attention in 88 years, so that it won't be lost, so that it will exist somewhere, in someone's keeping after I am gone. You strike me as a young person who keeps things, so I am giving it to you. I grew up the daughter of a fire lookout. Now I must explain what that was, because I find that young people today have no notion of it, the world having changed so utterly. Before there were airplanes and satellites and all the rest of it watching the forests, there were men and a few women who lived alone through the fire season in little towers built on the very tops of mountains, whose entire job, their whole purpose, was to watch the forest all day, every day, for the first thread of smoke that meant a fire was starting, so that it could be caught and put out before it grew into something that would burn 100,000 acres and the towns in them besides. It was a solitary life and a strange one, and not everyone was suited to it. The aloneness drove some people half mad, but my father loved it. My father was made for it. He manned a tower for the Forest Service from the spring through the fall, and in the summers, when there was no school, my mother and I would go up the mountain and stay with him in the little cabin at the base of the tower. And that tower and that mountaintop were our whole world for those months. The tower itself was a little room made all of glass, up on stilts at the very peak. And from it you could see for 50 miles in every direction, ridge after ridge after ridge, going blue, and then bluer into the far distance, until you couldn't tell mountain from sky. I have never in my long life seen anything as beautiful as the view from my father's tower, and I have seen a good deal. I traveled when I was younger, and I've seen oceans and cities and cathedrals, and none of it touched the sight of those endless blue ridges from the glass room at the top of the world. I expect I never will see anything to match it now. I expect the next thing I see to match it will be heaven if I've earned it, and some mornings I'm not certain I have, but that's between me and the Lord. My father's whole job was to watch for smoke, as I said, and he was the very best at it. He had a large map laid out on a table, and a clever instrument mounted in the center of it for taking bearings. A sighting device you'd line up on a smoke and read off the exact direction. And a telephone line that ran down the mountain on poles to connect him to the ranger station and the wider world. He knew that country, all 50 miles of it, better than he knew the lines on his own hand. He could tell you from a glance what was a harmless morning mist rising off a valley and what was the first breath of something that would kill people if it weren't stopped. He could tell a dust cloud from a campfire, from the start of a forest fire, at a distance of many miles, by the color and the shape and the speed and the way it moved on the air. The rangers trusted him completely. The whole valley below trusted him with their lives and their homes and their land, and in all his years in that tower, he never once let a single one of them down. I want you to know what kind of man my father was, how steady, how reliable, how utterly grounded and unfanciful, before I tell you the rest, because the rest only means what it means in the light of the kind of man he was. It was August, a dry August, the worst kind, the kind where everyone's nerves were worn to the bone, because the entire forest, every needle and twig and blade of grass in it, was dry as tinder and ready to go up like a struck match at the smallest spark. My father had been more watchful than ever, hardly sleeping, up at the glass in the gray before dawn, and still there at dusk. And one afternoon late, and with the light going gold and long the way it does, he saw smoke. He saw it to the northwest, down in a particular drainage that he knew well, a steep wooded valley with a creek at the bottom of it, a place he'd looked at 10,000 times. A thin gray line of smoke just starting up, just a thread of it rising straight up out of the trees. He went to his instrument and he took his bearing, precise as ever. He cranked the telephone and he reported it, the location and the compass bearing, all of it exact, the way he always did, his voice calm and professional. And then he waited for the spotter plane, because that was the procedure, you see. They didn't send men charging into the forest on one lookout's word, even a lookout as trusted as my father. They sent a small airplane to fly over the spot first and confirm it, and only then did they send the crews. So my father reported his smoke and waited for the plane, and my mother and I waited with him at the glass, all three of us looking at that thin gray thread rising out of the northwest drainage. The plane came. We heard it first, then saw it, a little single-engine thing droning in from the south, and we watched it fly toward the drainage. We watched it fly right over the spot, low, circling the way they did. And then the telephone rang, and my father answered it. And I watched his face as he listened, and I watched something happen to his face that I had never seen happen to it before, a kind of stillness. The pilot had radioed the station, and the station was relaying it to my father. And the message was that there was nothing there. No smoke, no fire, no scorch, no haze, no heat, Nothing at all. The drainage was clear and green and quiet as a churchyard. The pilot had flown directly over the bearing my father gave, twice, and seen only trees. My father did not believe it. He could not believe it because he could see the smoke. It was right there. He stood at the glass with the telephone in his hand and looked at that gray thread rising out of the drainage that an airplane had just flown straight through. And the men in the airplane said there was nothing there, and there plainly was. My mother could see it. I could see it. We all three of us stood at the glass and looked at the same column of gray smoke rising up out of the same green drainage, plain as the nose on your face, while a plane circled the empty air right where it stood and reported clear skies. He reported it again. He gave the bearing again, twice over, very carefully, thinking perhaps he'd misspoken or they'd misheard. The plane came back around. It flew the drainage a third time, lower still. Nothing, the radio said, nothing there. And now the light was going, evening coming on, and my father was in a state I had never seen in him in my whole life, because his entire life, the whole of his pride and his purpose and his usefulness in the world, was built on being right about exactly this one thing, on seeing true, and here before his own eyes, was the thing he could see as clear as day that the whole rest of the world was insisting was not there. And then my mother said the thing. My mother, who was a quiet woman, who rarely spoke unless she had something worth saying. She had been staring at the smoke a long while, and she said very softly, almost to herself, "It isn't moving." And she was right. The moment she said it, I saw it too, and I saw that I'd been seeing it all along without letting myself know it. We had been watching that smoke for the better part of an hour by then, and smoke moves. Smoke is the most restless thing there is. It drifts and it billows and it grows and it thins and it leans away on the wind and it changes shape from one breath to the next. You can watch a real smoke for a minute and see it do a dozen different things. And this had done none of them. Not one. For the better part of an hour, that gray thread had hung in the drainage in the exact same shape, in the exact same size, in the exact same place, unchanging like a photograph of smoke pasted onto the air, like a painted thing, utterly still. And here's the part that, when my mother said it and I understood it, made the hair stand up on my young arms and has kept it standing for 76 years. The wind was up that evening. A good wind. We could see the trees moving with it. The whole forest of trees on all the nearer ridges, swaying and tossing in a strong evening wind. And down in that drainage, in that same wind that was tossing every tree we could see, that thread of gray smoke stood perfectly, impossibly, unnaturally still, as if it were in a different world than the wind, as if the wind could not touch it, as if it were not really there in the air with the trees at all, but only pretending to be. My father stopped reporting it. He set the telephone in its cradle and he did not pick it up again. He didn't say why. He just stood at the glass a moment longer, looking at that still smoke and the moving wind. And then he did something he had never done, not once in all the summers I stayed with him. He put up the heavy wooden shutters over the windows of the glass room early, with light still in the sky, shutting out the view he loved more than anything, shutting out the smoke. And he took us down the ladder to the cabin, and he sat us down, and he was calm, but he was not himself. And he took down the rifle he kept for bears, and he loaded it, and he sat that whole night with his back to the wall and the rifle across his knees, facing the door. And he had my mother and me lie down on the floor, below the level of the windows, out of sight of them, and sleep there, or try to. I did not sleep much. I lay on that floor and watched my father sit awake all night with his gun, the steadiest man I ever knew, watching a door against something that had no business frightening a grown man. A wisp of smoke that an airplane had flown straight through. And I knew, child as I was, that whatever it was, it was bad. It was very bad. Because my father was not a man. Things frightened, and he was frightened, and he stayed frightened and awake and armed until the gray of dawn came around the edges of the shutters. In the morning, he took the shutters down. The drainage was green and clear. The smoke was gone if it had ever been there. And he never said one word about any of it. Not that morning, not ever. He went back to his watching as if nothing had happened. And I learned, the way a child learns these things without being told, that I was never ever to mention it, and so I did not. I asked him about it just once, years and years later, when I was a grown woman with children of my own, and he was an old man near the end of his life. I asked him, "Do you remember the smoke that wouldn't move, that summer in the tower?" And he looked at me for a long moment, a long, level look. And then he turned his face away and changed the subject, and talked about something else entirely. And I understood that the door was closed and would never open, and I let it be. And he died not long after with whatever he understood about that evening still locked up inside him. And now I'm the only one who was at that glass, and soon I won't be anyone at all, which is why you're reading this. I have had a very long time to think about what my father saw that evening, and chose not to report. 76 years of thinking about it, on and off, in the quiet hours. And here's what I have come to, for whatever an old woman's notions are worth to you. I think my father understood something at that glass that he did not have the words for, and did not want to have the words for. I think when the plane came back the second time, and then the third, and said there was nothing in the drainage, my father stopped thinking of the thing he could see as smoke. I think he started thinking of it as a lure, as bait, as something that had made itself look exactly like the one thing my father's whole life was built around seeing and reporting and acting on, the one thing guaranteed to make men come, and that wanted, more than anything, to be reported, to have men sent down into that lonely drainage where the plains saw nothing, and the creek ran at the bottom of the steep wooded sides. And I think the reason my father put up the shutters and loaded his rifle and sat awake all night facing the door was that he had refused it. He had not sent the men. He had not given it what it so badly wanted. And having refused it, he was afraid, deeply and bodily afraid, that it might leave the drainage and come up the mountain in the dark to ask him for the men in person. Nothing came up the mountain. We had many more summers in that tower, my father and my mother and I, good summers, and nothing strange ever happened again. And I have a whole long happy life of memories from that glass room that have nothing to do with fear. I want to end on that because it's true, and because my father would want it said. The mountain was good to us, almost always. The strange evening was one evening out of hundreds. But it was the one I'm giving you because it's the one that must not be lost, the one only I remember now. The evening my steadfast father saw a smoke that would not move in a rising wind, that an airplane flew straight through and was wise enough or afraid enough to refuse it, and sat up all night with a rifle making sure it took no for an answer. Thank you for letting me tell it. The young people in the common room don't quite believe me. I can see it in their faces. The kind ones humoring an old woman, and the unkind ones not bothering to. But they listen, and that's all I wanted, to have it heard once more, properly, by someone who keeps things, before there's nobody left who stood at that glass and saw it with their own eyes. I will add only this, and then I'm done because an old woman is allowed one last thought. I've wondered all these years whether my father did right. Whether refusing to report the smoke, sitting up all night with his rifle, never speaking of it again, was wisdom or only fear dressed up as wisdom. And I have decided at the very end of a long life that it does not matter which it was, because the result was the same. He did not send the men, and the men were not taken, and we all came down off that mountain at the end of the season alive, and we had many good summers after. Sometimes wisdom and fear counsel the very same thing, and when they do, you would be a fool to argue with both of them at once. My father was no fool. He saw a thing that should not be, and he did not feed it what it asked for, and he guarded his family through the dark, and in the morning he took down the shutters and went back to his good and useful work, as though the world were ordinary, because for everyone else it still was. And that was a kindness too, to let it stay ordinary for my mother and me as long as he could. That is the whole of what I learned from him, I think, more than I learned from anyone. That a man can see the strangeness plainly and still choose deliberately not to let it have him, nor his. It is in your keeping now. Mind it for me. Eleanor. Story 4. Okay, so, context. I'm a wildlife biology grad student, or I was when this happened. I've since switched fields entirely, and this is a big part of why. I'm going to try to be precise because precision is sort of my whole personality, and also because I genuinely think the details are the point. The details are where this lives. It's not a spooky feeling story. It's a spooky data story, if that makes sense. And the data is what I can't get away from. My research was on a small mammal population. I'm going to be deliberately vague about the exact species and the exact location, partly because the field site is still active, and other people's work depends on it, and I don't want to make it weird for them. And partly, honestly, because I don't want anybody going there. The short version of the methodology is that I ran a grid of trail cameras across a study area. Motion-triggered cameras strapped to trees at known GPS points. And every 2 weeks I hiked the grid to swap the SD cards out for fresh ones and check the batteries and make sure nothing had been knocked askew by weather or animals. I did this for 14 months, mostly alone, which is technically against field safety protocol. You're supposed to have a buddy, but funding is funding, and there was never money for a second person. And so I went alone, the way basically every grad student in the history of fieldwork has cut that exact corner. I want to establish, before anything else, that I am extremely comfortable in those woods. I had spent, by the time this happened, hundreds of hours in that study area every time of day, and a fair amount of the night. I know the difference between the sound of a deer moving through brush and a person moving through brush. I know it cold. I know every bird call out there, everyone. I could do you the whole dawn chorus. I am not a nervous person in the field, or I wasn't. I found it the opposite of nervous making. I found it deeply calming. It was the best part of the whole degree, the hiking and the solitude in the woods. This matters because I need you to understand that nothing about being alone in those woods spooked me. The thing that spooked me wasn't a feeling. It was a finding. The cameras are motion triggered, and they stamp every photograph with the date and the time down to the second. That matters enormously, the timestamps, so hold on to that. So in month 11, I'm doing my routine card swap, 14 cameras. Takes most of a day to hike the whole grid. Nothing unusual about the day at all. And I get home that evening, and I start doing the part of the job that is mind-numbingly boring, which is going through the images, thousands and thousands of them per card, the overwhelming majority of which are nothing. A branch swaying in the wind, tripping the sensor, rain, a leaf, the occasional actual target animal, which is what you're hoping for. Sometimes a deer or a raccoon or a fox passing through. You click through them fast. You've got software that helps. You're basically pattern matching for animals and discarding the rest. It's tedious and you go a little numb doing it. I had music on. It was a totally ordinary evening, and on camera 7 there was a sequence. Camera 7 was the furthest one in, the worst one to reach, the one at the back of the grid, in the thickest, steepest, most miserable patch of the whole study area. A good 40-minute fight in from the nearest place you could even pretend was a trail. I hated camera 7. Everybody who'd ever helped me hated camera 7. It was sited there for good scientific reasons about habitat, but reaching it was the low point of every field day. The first image in the sequence is timestamped 3:14 in the morning, and it's a man. He's standing maybe 15 feet from the camera, facing it. Not looking directly into the lens, exactly, just facing its general direction, his body oriented toward it, his face turned a little off to the side. An average-looking guy, middle-aged maybe, hard to tell. Flannel shirt, dark work pants, The kind of clothes a hunter or a hiker or just a guy from around there would wear. Nothing remarkable. The camera's infrared flash has fired because it's the dead middle of the night. So he's lit up stark and bright and a little washed out against the total black of the woods behind him, floating there in the dark. This ordinary man, at 3:14 in the morning, 40 minutes hard hike from anything, at the worst to reach camera in my entire grid. Now, my honest first reaction, sitting there at my laptop, was just annoyance. Because we'd had some trespasser issues over the months. People wander. And I figured this was a hunter scouting the area or somebody who'd gotten way off a trail, or just some guy doing whatever guys do in the woods at night. And mostly I was annoyed because trespassers can mess with the cameras and the data. So I'm annoyed, and I click to the next image to see what he did. The next image is timestamped 3:51 in the morning, 37 minutes later. And it's the same man, in the same spot, in the same posture, almost exactly identical. Same stance, same orientation, same everything, standing 15 feet off facing the camera in the black, lit up by the flash 37 minutes after the first one. And then the third image is 4:38. Same. The fourth is 5:25. Same. Are you seeing it yet, the thing I saw? Let me say it plainly, because it took me a few frames to let myself actually see it. He is appearing in the frame at intervals. And the intervals are 47 minutes. Give or take a couple of seconds, but essentially exactly 47 minutes. Over and over, all night long. And in every single appearance, he is in the identical position. Not approximately, identically. Same stance, same lean, same angle of the head, like a figure that has been placed there, removed and placed there again in precisely the same spot. And here's the crucial thing about the camera, the thing that makes the timestamps mean what they mean. It's motion triggered. If something is in the frame and moving, even slightly, even breathing, even swaying, the sensor keeps firing. You get a burst of images, rapid fire, as long as there's motion. That's how the technology works. That's its whole job. So a person standing in front of that camera for an hour would not produce one image. They'd produce hundreds. A continuous burst the whole time they were there. Every shift of weight, every breath. Tripping it again and again. But that's not what Camera 7 recorded. Camera 7 recorded a single, isolated, motion onset image. Then nothing for 47 minutes. Then another single, isolated, motion onset image. Then nothing for 47 minutes. And so on, 8 times through the night. Which means if you take the technology at its word, and there's no reason not to, that the frame was empty, and then motion began, and a man was suddenly there. And then the man was so perfectly still that the sensor stopped registering him as motion, and the camera went quiet. And then, before the next image, the frame was empty again, because otherwise the next appearance 47 minutes later would also have been a continuation and not a fresh motion onset. And then 47 minutes after that, the motion began again, and the man was there again, in the exact same spot, having arrived from an empty frame. And this happened on a fixed 47-minute clock, all night, until the very last frame, timestamped 6:12 in the morning, which is just empty woods, gray with the first dawn light, no flash needed, no man, nothing, as if it had never been there. I'm a scientist. My entire training is the systematic elimination of explanations, so that's what I did that night and over the following weeks. I went looking hard for the boring answer, and I want to walk you through the boring answers I eliminated, because the elimination is the whole reason I'm writing to you instead of just laughing this off, which is what I dearly wanted to do. A hoax. Somebody who knew where Camera 7 was, knew the worst to reach camera in my grid, and went out there to mess with me. I consider this hardest of all because it's the most comforting. But the intervals defeat it. 47 minutes is too long and too precise for a person to maintain by standing still. You cannot stand perfectly, motionlessly still for the stretches between the images in the cold, dark woods. No shifting, no breathing visibly, nothing the sensor would catch, and then move only to reassume an identical position on a clock. Your body won't do it. You'd cramp, you'd sway, you'd have to sit or pace in the gaps, and the camera would catch you doing it. And why 47 minutes? A hoaxer messing with you doesn't run a precise 47-minute cycle all night in identical poses. It's not even a satisfying number to a human. It's not on the hour, not the half hour, not anything a person would naturally choose. It's just 47 minutes, mechanically all night. A malfunction. The same image being resaved with new timestamps, some software bug. But the images are not identical. I checked obsessively. The moon, where it catches a gap in the canopy at the top of the frame, is in a slightly different position in each image, consistent with the actual passage of real time across a real night. The moon moving the way the moon moves. There's a bug, a moth or something, on his collar in one frame that is not there in the next. The images are genuinely separate exposures of a genuinely present subject at genuinely different real moments through one real night. It's not a resave. The night really passed, frame by frame, and he was really there. 8 times on the clock. That I was just being an idiot, misreading ordinary photos through tiredness. But I showed them eventually to 2 people in the program I trusted, without telling them what I thought. Just, what do you make of this sequence? And both of them separately went quiet, and then said some version of what I'd been unable to stop thinking, which is, why is it on a clock? Because that's the thing. That's the thing none of us could get past, the regularity. Nature is not regular like that. Animals are not regular like that. People are not regular like that. A real man does not appear in the deepest part of the woods on a 47-minute mechanical cycle in an identical pose facing a camera he has no way of knowing is there. The only things in my experience that produce events on a fixed, precise interval are machines, clocks, things that are counting. And there was no machine out there. There was a camera and 40 minutes of brutal brush in every direction, and a man who wasn't a man, appearing on a count of 47 minutes through the dark, facing the one piece of technology in all that wilderness, all night long, and then gone with the dawn. Before I pulled it, though, I did one more thing because I'm me and I had to. And it's the detail that pushed the whole business from deeply unsettling into something I have never been able to set down. I went back through the other 13 cameras. All of them, the whole grid, every card from that same 2-week period in the same way, frame by frame. Looking specifically now. Looking for him, the man in the flannel, on any other camera at any other time. He's on 4 of them, not all 14. 4, camera 7, the deep one where I first found him, and then 3 others. And here's what undid me, sitting there at my laptop at 2 in the morning going cold all over. The 4 cameras he appears on are not near each other. They're scattered across the whole grid, the far back 1, and then 3 others spread out over a couple of square miles of rough country. And when I laid out his appearances by timestamp, all of them, every single frame across all 4 cameras, in order the 47-minute interval holds. Across the cameras, he appears at camera 7, and then 47 minutes later, he appears at a camera most of a mile away, in the same identical pose, facing it, and then 47 minutes after that at another one, and so on. The same mechanical interval, the same identical stance, moving between cameras that are a mile or more of brutal terrain apart, in 47 minutes, on foot, in the dark, leaving no trip in between, just appearing, motionless, facing the lens, then gone, then appearing at the next one on the count. You cannot walk that. I want to be completely clear about the physical reality, because the physical reality is the entire point. I know that ground. I hiked that grid for 14 months. Getting from camera 7 to the next camera he appears on is for a fit person moving in daylight with good boots and knowing exactly where they're going. At least 90 minutes of hard travel, much of it the kind of brush you fight through rather than walk through. He did it in 47 minutes, in the dark, and arrived not winded, not moving, but already perfectly still in his identical pose facing the camera, having apparently been standing there motionless long enough to not even trip the sensor more than once. And then he did it again to the next one, all night. A thing in the shape of an ordinary man in a flannel shirt, distributing itself across 2 square miles of wilderness on a 47-minute clock, presenting itself in turn to each of the watching eyes I had placed in those woods, like it was making rounds, like it was checking each of my cameras in sequence, like it knew there were more than one, and where they all were, and wanted to be sure it had been seen by each of them, on the count, before the night was over. I pulled camera 7. I hiked in alone in broad daylight, with my heart going the whole way, and I unstrapped it from its tree, and I did not sight another one anywhere near there, and I never went back to that spot again. I finished out the remaining months of data collection on the other 13 cameras, and for those last few months I finally, suddenly found money in the budget for a field buddy. Funny how that works. A fellow student who thankfully never once asked me why I'd so abruptly decided I needed company on hikes I'd done alone for a year. I wrote my thesis. The mammal data was fine, by the way, perfectly good data. The project succeeded. And then I got out. I switched to lab work for my doctorate, controlled environments, fluorescent lights, no woods. I still have the camera. 7 images. They're backed up in 3 places. I've thought more than once about getting them properly analyzed. Full forensic metadata, the works, by someone who'd take it seriously and rigorously and tell me what they really are. And every time I decide not to, and I've finally been honest with myself about why. It's not that I'm afraid they'll turn out to be faked, that I got pranked, that I've been a fool. I'd be relieved by that. It's that I'm afraid a serious analysis would conclude what I was already in my bones know it would conclude, which is that the images are clean, unaltered, genuine. Exactly what they appear to be, a real night, really passing, with a man who was not a man standing in the deepest dark of those woods, appearing once every 47 minutes, in a pose that never changed, facing my camera with what I can only describe. And I know how this sounds, as patience, as if it had all night, as if it knew exactly what the camera was and was letting itself be counted. I'm much happier indoors now. I want you to know that. The lab is bright and loud and full of people, and nothing out there is ever on a clock, and I sleep fine. Mostly. I do sometimes wake at 3:14 in the morning, and I lie there and I think about the woods and about counting, and then it passes and I go back to sleep, and in the morning it's nothing. Story 5. My daddy taught me to hunt, and my granddaddy taught him, and that's about as far back as I can swear to, but I'd lay money it goes a sight further than that. All the way back to whenever the first of us came over these mountains and figured out how to feed a family off of them. I'm telling you that so you'll know I'm not some city fella who heard an owl and wet himself. I've killed more deer than I can count, and dressed everyone with my own hands, and turkey and bear, and I've been in these woods before dawn more mornings than most folks have been awake before dawn, for any reason in their whole soft lives. The woods is my church. I mean that as plain as I can say it. I have felt closer to God on a cold ridge at first light with a rifle across my lap than I ever have inside any building with a steeple on it. So you understand what kind of man you're hearing from. So when I tell you I quit hunting one particular holler and that I'll never set foot in it again as long as I draw breath, and that I warn my own grown son off of it in words I don't use lightly, you'll understand that does not come easy to a man like me. It cost me something to quit that ground. It was good ground. But there's some things worth more than good ground, and your own mind is one of them. And I came closer to losing mine in that holler than I ever want to come again. There's a place I won't name, and I won't name it on purpose. A holler that runs back off the main ridge, deep, real deep, with steep sides closing it in. The kind of place where the sun don't reach the bottom till near noon and gives up on it again by 3 in the afternoon, so the bottom of it lives in a kind of half dark, even on a bright day. Good deer country, that. Quiet, sheltered, water at the bottom. The deer loved it, and so did I. I'd hunted that holler going on 15 years, knew every deer trail and rub and scrape in it, and in 15 years, I never had one lick of trouble back in there. Never anything but good hunting and good quiet, and the kind of peace a man like me goes to the woods to find. Now, before I get to the morning that finished me with that holler, I've got to tell you about a thing that happened years before it, because I didn't understand the first thing until the second thing made me go back and understand it, and I think the two of them together are the whole of what I've got to say. Years before. My daddy was still living then, still hunting, though he'd slowed down a good deal. He and I were in that same holler late season, the two of us a couple 100 yards apart, working toward each other the way we like to do, push the deer back and forth between us. And along about mid-morning, I heard my daddy whistle. We had a whistle between us, he and I. A particular 2-note thing his daddy taught him. Meant come here, come to me, nothing urgent, just come on over. And I heard it plain off to my left where he was. That exact 2-note whistle. Ours. The one nobody else in the world used. And I started over toward him, working through the brush. And I'd gone maybe halfway when I heard it again. Only this time it come from off to my right. Behind me, near about. Same whistle, our whistle. And I stopped because that didn't make a lick of sense. My daddy being off to my left, and the slope being what it was, there was no way he'd got around behind me to my right, without me hearing him move through that dry brush, an old man, no. And while I stood there puzzling on it, it come a third time. From a third place, up the slope above me now. Our whistle, perfect. The 2 notes just so. I didn't go to any of them. I don't know why. I was a younger man then, and not as wise as I'd get. But something kept me from going toward any of those 3 whistles, and instead, I cupped my hands and I hollered out loud, "Daddy!" Just hollered it, my voice, words, out loud across the holler. And there was a silence, a bad silence. And then from way off to my left, the first place, the right place, my daddy hollered back, "What?" Annoyed the way he got. He hadn't whistled at all. He'd been sitting on a log the whole while, waiting on me to push deer to him, and he hadn't made a sound, and when I got to him and told him I'd heard our whistle from 3 places, he gave me a long look. My daddy did, and he didn't laugh it off the way I expected. He just said, "We don't whistle in this holler no more." That's all. We don't whistle in this holler no more, and we never did again, him nor me. And I never thought too hard on it. I chalked it up to an echo, the way you do, and I let it go for years and years. And I didn't let it go after the morning I'm about to tell you about. After that morning, I remembered the whistles, and I understood my daddy had known something about that holler he never put words to, the same as his daddy likely knew, and that the thing in there had been trying us a long time, learning our sounds, our whistle, our names, waiting on the one of us that'd answer and come. My daddy never answered it. I never answered it. But it kept on trying year on year. And the morning it tried me with the footsteps was just the last time. The time it near about got me. The time I quit the holler for good, rather than give it the chances my daddy'd spent a lifetime not giving it. So, that morning, I was up in a tree stand I'd hung the season before, way back at the head of the holler. Settled in good and early, before there was light enough to see my own hand, sitting still and waiting on the gray to come up the way you do, the way I'd done 1,000 mornings. And as the light started to come gray, and then a little more than gray, I commenced to notice that the woods was wrong. I don't know a better word for it than that. Wrong. And it took me a minute of sitting there before I worked out what it was, and when I worked it out, it put a cold finger right up the middle of my back. There wasn't a sound, not one. And you don't think about it. You don't notice it when it's there. But the woods at first light is loud, friend. It is downright noisy if you're paying attention. And I am always paying attention. That's the whole job. There's birds waking up and fussing, chickadees and titmice and wrens, a crow off somewhere running its mouth, a squirrel cutting on a nut or cussing at you for being in his tree, a woodpecker working his snag, all of it. The whole forest waking up and getting loud about it. First light is the loudest the woods ever gets. And that morning there was nothing. Dead silence. Not a bird, not a squirrel, not a bug. Like the whole holler was holding its breath. Like every living thing in it had gone still and quiet and small all at the same time, and was waiting on something and didn't dare make a sound. Now I've had it go quiet before, understand? A hawk comes sailing through an owl, and everything hushes up tight for a minute or two until the danger passes over. That's natural, that happens, but it always passes. The little things always start back up once the hawk's gone by. This didn't pass. It just held and held, minute after minute after minute, the silence just sitting on that holler like a weight. And the longer it held, the worse I felt. And what I felt, I'll tell you exactly, was that crawling feeling come up the back of my neck and into my scalp. The prickle, the one that means in your gut and your skin, before your mind has any say in it, that something is watching you. I have felt it maybe twice before in my whole life. Both times turned out to be a bear I hadn't seen yet, and I knew it for what it was the second it came on me. A hunter knows that feeling better than most men because a hunter's in the business of making other things feel it. I've put that feeling on the back of many a deer's neck. And that morning I was on the wrong end of it, hard, and I knew it. And there wasn't a bear in the world that ever made the feeling come on that strong. Then I heard a deer coming. And I need to slow down and tell this part careful, because this is the part that matters. This is the part that's kept me out of that holler the rest of my life. I heard it coming up the holler from below me, coming toward my stand, picking its way through the dry leaves, that careful stop-and-go rhythm a deer makes when it's moving easy and unbothered, a step or two and a pause, a step and a pause. The exact, particular, unmistakable sound of a white-tailed deer walking through hardwood leaves. I have heard that sound 10,000 times if I've heard it once. There's no mistaking it for anything else in this world. And it was coming right up toward me, right up the holler to my stand, in the dead silence. The only sound in the whole hushed holler, that deer walking up easy through the leaves. And every single thing my daddy and his daddy never taught me said, "Raise your rifle, son. Here comes your buck, get ready. This is what you climbed up here in the dark for." And I did not raise my rifle. I have thought about why 1,000 times since, and the best I can tell you is this. It was the wrongness of it. The whole holler had gone dead silent. Every living thing in it gone to ground, hiding from something. The watching feeling crawling all over me like ants. And here comes one deer walking up through the middle of all that. Easy as Sunday morning, unbothered. The only thing moving, the only thing making a sound, walking right to me. And some part of me older and deeper than all my daddy's teaching said no. Said that is not right. Said no deer with any sense walks easy through a holler where everything else has hid itself. And that whatever had made everything else hide had not made this deer afraid. Which meant this deer either was not afraid of it or was not a deer. And I have learned in 60-some years of life and 50 of hunting to listen to that older, deeper part of me. The part that knows things before my thinking mind gets the news. And that morning it was not whispering, it was hollering. Sit still, do not move, do not raise that rifle. Watch. So I sat dead still, rifle across my lap, and I watched the spot where it was going to come out into the open. A little patch of clear ground, maybe 40 yards below my stand, where I could see good. And the sound stopped. It came up the holler, step and pause, right up to the very edge of that clear ground, right to the spot where it should have walked out into the open, where I could see it, where I was looking right at. And the footsteps in the leaves just quit. Stopped dead. And there was nothing there. I was looking right at the spot, 40 yards, clear open ground, gray morning light. My eyes are still good, and I was looking right at where the sound ended, and there was not one thing standing there. The walking came up out of the holler, right to the edge of my sight, and stopped, and nothing came out, and nothing was there. Now you tell me, a deer does not walk up to the edge of open ground and stop dead and stand there invisible. And if it had spooked, if it had winded me or caught a glimpse of me up in that stand and bolted, I'd have heard it. That's the loudest thing in all the woods. A blown-out whitetail crashing off, white flag up, thunder through the brush, can't miss it. It didn't bolt, it didn't ease off, it didn't do one single thing. The sound of it just ceased to be all at once, right at the edge of where I'd have laid eyes on it, like somebody had lifted the needle off a record. And the silence came rushing back in to fill the hole where it had been. And I sat up in that tree stand with my heart going like a hammer, and I did not move. I want to be honest about how long. It was the better part of an hour. I sat froze in that stand for near an hour, rifle across my lap, not moving, hardly breathing, while the dead silence held over that holler, because every animal instinct I had left in me past the fear was screaming that the worst thing I could possibly do was move, was let it know I'd noticed, was give it a reason. And then, all at once, the birds started up, like somebody threw a switch. The whole dawn chorus came on at once. The chickadees and the crow and the squirrel. The holler woke back up loud and ordinary in a single second. And the second it did, the watching feeling went off my neck like a hand lifted off of it. And I knew, the same way I'd known it was there, that whatever had been in that holler with me had left. And only then, only when the birds told me it was gone, did I climb down out of that tree, and I will tell you, I came down out of that stand faster than a man my age has got any business coming down out of anything. And I walked out of that holler not looking back, and I've never set foot in it again. I left the stand up, never went back for it. For all I know, it's still bolted to that tree, rotting, 15 years on. I didn't want it. I didn't want anything that had been in that holler with me. My boy asked me why I quit hunting back in there, it being such good ground, and I told him near about what I've told you, and he gave me that look he gives. The one that says the old man's finally gone soft in the head. And you know what? I let him think it. I'd rather my son think his daddy turned superstitious and foolish in his old age than have him go back in that holler to prove there's nothing to it. Because that's just what he'd do. He's got my stubborn in him, and I can't have it. I can't have him sitting up in some stand back in there in the dead silence and hearing footsteps come up easy out of the leaves and stop right at the edge of his sight where there's nothing standing. Let him think I'm a foolish old man. Some things you do not want proved, and you surely do not want your own son to be the one who proves them. A quick word, call to action 2 of 3. We're about halfway through tonight's submissions. If you've made it this far, thank you. And do me a favor and drop a comment with which story's gotten under your skin the most, because I genuinely read them, and it helps the video get shown to more people. Subscriptions and comments are the whole ballgame for a channel like this. Okay, onward. Story 6. I debated sending this in for a long time because the people involved are private people, and one of them is no longer here to say whether he'd mind it being told. And in the end, I decided he'd want the warning out there more than he'd want his privacy kept, because that was the kind of man he was. A man who'd have wanted his hard story to do somebody else some good. I'll change the names and a few small details. The bones of it are exactly true. I'm a retired search and rescue volunteer, 22 years on a county team up in the mountains. I've done more searches than I could put a number to, in every season and every kind of weather, and I have found people in every condition a person can be found in, the lost and the hurt and the dead, and now and again, thank God, the alive and well. I have carried out the living on a litter, and I have carried out the dead in a bag, and I made my peace a long time ago with the fact that this work means you see things and carry things most people never have to. I'm not a man who's easily shaken anymore. The work shakes it out of you or you don't last, and I lasted 22 years. But there's one call I never made my peace with, one I carry separate from all the rest. And it's not a gory one, and it's not even, by the numbers, a tragedy. By the numbers, it's a save. It's the one save I'm not sure was a kindness, and I've turned it over in my head 10,000 times in the years since. And I'm sending it to you because I've never been able to set it down, and maybe writing it out will help. Other people have said that on your channel, that the writing helped. I hope they're right. We got paged on a fall evening for an overdue hiker. A man in his 50s, experienced, fit, knew the area, and who told his wife that morning he was going out to do a particular day loop, a well-known one, nothing technical. It would be home by dark, and dark had come and gone, and he hadn't, and his truck was still at the trailhead, and his wife had called it in. By the time the team deployed, it was getting on toward his second night out, and the temperature was dropping hard. Frost coming, and a fit, experienced man missing one night might just be a twisted ankle and a cold bivouac, but a second night in those temperatures starts to get serious. So we went in fast and treated it as urgent. I'll spare you the full mechanics of how a search runs and the grids and the probabilities and the radio discipline. It'd put you to sleep. What matters for this story is that on the second day of searching, my partner and I drew an assignment that nobody much believed in. A drainage well off the man's planned route on the far side of a ridge from his loop, country he had no earthly reason to be in, assigned to us more for completeness than out of any real expectation. The kind of low probability area you clear so you can say you cleared it. We griped about it a little, if I'm honest. The long hike in for the long odds, and then we shouldered our packs and went, because that's the job. You clear your assignment whether you believe in it or not. And thank God we did, or maybe not, I still don't know. And we found him, alive. He was a good 4 miles from where any reasonable person would have been, far off his loop, on the wrong side of the ridge. Deep in that drainage he'd had no reason to enter, sitting on the ground with his back against a big tree. He was in bad shape, hypothermic and badly dehydrated and confused. But he was alive. His airway was clear. He was responsive. And one look told both of us he was going to make it now that we had him. And I want to be honest about the feeling because it's part of the story. We were elated. There is no feeling in this world like finding them alive after a hard search, against the odds, in the place nobody thought to look. It's the whole reason you do the work, that feeling. You live for it. We radioed it in, alive, found, and you could hear the whole net come alive with it. We got to work, fluids and heat packs and dry layers, doing everything to bring him back up toward warm and safe. And as we worked on him, he kept trying to tell us something. He was weak and his speech was slurred from the cold and the confusion, but he kept at it, kept trying. And we kept doing what you do, telling him easy now. Save your strength and don't try to talk. We've got you, you can tell us everything later. But he was insistent, more than insistent. He kept reaching for my partner's sleeve and trying, and finally, my partner, who's a kinder man than me, said let him say it. Maybe it'll settle him to get it out. And so we let him talk, and the man told us, and he got clearer as he said it. Not less clear, clearer. His eyes focusing, the words coming steadier. He told us that he'd followed his daughter out here. Now. We knew from the briefing, from the family interview the team does at the start, that this man had one daughter, and that she had died, years before. A car accident when she was 19. It had been in the briefing specifically because it was relevant to his state of mind. The kind of thing that matters when you're trying to think, like a missing person, a recent anniversary, a grief, anything that might have had him not himself that day. So when he said he'd followed his daughter out here, we both took it, naturally, for the confusion, for the cold, doing what the cold does to a man's mind. The hallucinations that come with deep hypothermia, which are real and well documented, and we'd both seen them before. And so he said, "Easy, okay, it's all right, we've got you now, you're safe," the way you'd soothe anybody. But he grabbed my arm. And here's the thing I've never been able to set down, the thing at the center of it. He was lucid. In that moment, telling us this, he was completely eerily lucid. Not raving, not slurring. The confusion had cleared right off of him for the length of the telling, the way I've heard it sometimes does right at the end of things. And he looked right at me with clear eyes, and he told it to me plain and calm and simple, like a man telling you about his weekend, and I'll give it to you the way he gave it to me. He said she'd been standing at the edge of the trail on the first evening, just off in the trees a little way, just standing there, looking at him. And she'd looked, he said, exactly the way she'd looked at 19, the last age he'd had her, not a day older, dressed the way she used to dress. And she hadn't said anything. She'd just looked at him, and then she'd turned and walked a little way into the woods and looked back over her shoulder at him, the way you do when you want someone to follow you. And so he had. He'd left his loop and gone after her into the trees off the trail, and every time he'd stopped, every time the cold or the dark or some scrap of his sensible mind had made him hesitate or think about turning back, she'd be there again, a little ways ahead, waiting for him, patient, looking back at him to come on, and so he'd come on. For 2 days, following his girl deeper and deeper into country he had no reason to be in. And he said, and this is the part of it that haunts me worst, he said it had made him happy. He'd been so happy to follow her. He'd stopped feeling the cold, he said. He'd stopped being afraid. He just wanted to keep following her wherever she was leading him, because she was leading him somewhere, he was sure of it, somewhere she wanted him to be, and he was glad, so glad to go. And then he told us the last of it, and I've never repeated this part to anyone but my wife, and I'm only telling you now because he's gone, and it might do some good. He said that just before we found him, his daughter had stopped leading. She'd turned all the way around and stood in front of him, facing him, blocking his way for the first time. And for the first time, he said, she looked. He used that word, and I've never gotten it out of my head. He said up until then her face had been kind, glad, beckoning, but now she looked sorry, sorrowful, like she regretted something. And she'd shaken her head, slow, no. And she'd raised her arm and pointed, back the way they'd come, back toward where he'd come from. And then, he said, she was gone, just gone, not there anymore. And the warm, happy following feeling went out of him all at once, and the cold came roaring back, and he was suddenly a frozen, confused man, alone in a strange drainage, with no good idea how he'd gotten there. And he'd sat down against that tree because he couldn't go on. And a few minutes later, he said he'd heard us, heard the team calling his name in the distance, seen the bob of our headlamps coming. I want to tell you one more thing about that drainage, because it's been part of what's kept me up, and then I'll get to the end. In my 22 years after that call, I went back and did something I'd never have bothered with before it. I went through the team's old records, the historical ones, the searches going back to before my time, the way you'd never normally do. And I looked specifically at that drainage, that one steep wooded fold of country on the wrong side of the ridge that the man had no reason to be in. And it's come up before, more than the odds would have it come up. Over the decades, more lost people have been found in or near that one drainage than any sensible accounting of where lost people actually go would predict. Because lost people, statistically, behave in known ways. They go downhill. They follow water. They cut switchbacks. There's a whole science to where they end up. And that drainage is not where the science says they should end up. And yet they end up there, more than they should. And a number of them, more than should be, were found the way that man was found, well, alive but altered, or not alive at all, far off any route that made sense, deep in a fold of country that the trails very deliberately swing wide of. And I noticed something else going through those old files, something I almost wish I hadn't. A few of the old reports, the ones detailed enough to include what the found person said, the ones where the person was alive enough to say anything, mention the same kind of thing. Not in those words. The language is different across the decades. An old ranger writes it up one way, a different one writes it another, but the shape of it is there more than once. Across the years, a lost person found in that drainage who said they'd been following someone they knew, someone who couldn't have been there, someone who'd led them, they said, and who they'd been glad, so glad to follow. I sat with those old files a long time, the way I sat with everything about that call, and I understood that the man I'd carried out was not the first, that whatever's in that drainage has been doing this a long time patiently to whoever wanders close enough to the wrong side of that ridge while carrying enough grief to be worked on, and that the only thing unusual about my call was that we found him in time, and that he lived long enough to tell us, lucid, exactly what it had shown him. We got him out, carried him down through the night to where we could get him to a hospital, and he recovered physically all the way, no lasting harm from the cold. By the numbers, a clean save, the best kind of call. And I went home after and slept the deep sleep you sleep after a save, the good tired, the proud tired. But he was never right after that, his wife told me later, a good while later. He came home and he healed up in his body, but something in him had gone somewhere else and never quite came back. And he was quiet and far off, and he passed about a year on from the search, in his sleep, his heart, the doctor said, though his wife had her own ideas. And I went to the service because we do when we can. And afterward, his wife took both my hands in hers and thanked me, thanked the whole team for finding her husband, for bringing him home, for giving her that last year with him. And then she leaned in and she said something to me, quiet, just for me, that I have carried every day since and will carry into my own grave. She said that near the end he told her something he'd never told the team. He'd told her he wished we hadn't found him. He'd wished, he said, that we'd been just a few hours later, because then he believed, with his whole heart he believed it. He'd have caught up to wherever his daughter was leading him before his body gave out, and she'd have taken him all the way to wherever she was, to be with her. And he'd spent his whole last year grieving not her, but us, angry at us, the men who'd called him back from the edge of going to his girl. And he'd died, his wife thought, of wanting to go back out there and finish the walk we'd interrupted. I have thought about that more than I've thought about anything else in 22 years of this work, more than the bodies, more than the hard recoveries, more than any of it. Because here's the thing I cannot resolve, the thing that keeps me up. We saved that man's life. It is, on paper, the proudest single thing I ever did. And I do not know, I will never know, whether it was a kindness or a cruelty. I don't know what he saw out there in that drainage. I don't know whether a grieving mind, pushed past its limits by cold and exhaustion and an old unhealed wound, built his lost daughter out of love and shadow and led him to a quiet death in the deep woods all on its own, which the doctors would tell you is exactly what happened and is entirely possible and is probably the truth. Or whether something else, something that lives back in that country, put on the shape of a dead girl it had no right to wear, and used the deepest love a man had to walk him, happy and unafraid, 4 miles off his route to die alone in a drainage where nobody would think to look, and was thwarted at the very last by us, by the one low probability assignment nobody believed in. And in that last moment, finding itself beaten, found one scrap of something like mercy or like shame, and turned and looked sorry and pointed him home. I genuinely do not know which of those two things it was, I have spent years not knowing. And I'll tell you the worst of it, the thing I can hardly stand to write. I'm not sure which one I'd rather it was. Because if it was just his own grieving mind, then we saved a man only to have him die slow of a broken heart. And there's a terrible sadness in that. But if it was the other thing, the thing in the woods, then it means it can wear the faces of our dead. And it means it knows exactly how to use the best and deepest things in us. Our love against us, to lead us happy and willing to our deaths. And there's a terror in that I can hardly hold in my two hands. If you take one single thing from this letter, take this. And I mean it as plainly and seriously as I have ever meant anything. If you are ever out there in the deep woods, and you see somebody you love who cannot possibly be there, anybody, your mother, your child, anybody you've lost, do not follow them. I do not care how real it looks. I do not care how much you ache to. The real ones, the true memories, the honest grief, they don't lead you off the trail and down into the deep, dark country. They don't beckon you away from the way home. Whatever wears that face and walks ahead of you into the trees is not your beloved dead, however perfectly it's made itself to look like them. And the surest sign of it is the direction. It always leads away from the road. So you turn around. You turn your back on the face you love, hard as that is, hardest thing in the world. And you walk out toward the road, toward the trailhead, toward the lights, and you be the one who comes home. Be the one who comes home. Don't make some volunteer carry you out and spend the rest of his life wondering. Story 7. Right, I'll keep this businesslike, because that's how my brain works. And frankly, the businesslike details are exactly what make it impossible for me to dismiss, which is why I'm sending it to you instead of just quietly losing my mind about it on my own. I'm a retired surveyor by profession, before I tell you the relevant bit, and I mention it only so you'll understand that I'm a person who notices small discrepancies and cannot let them go. It's a personality defect, my wife says. It's also why this happened to me, and not to somebody who would have walked past it none the wiser. And I go back and forth on whether that was good luck or bad. I do trail maintenance. Volunteer for a regional path association. Have done for 11 years now, ever since I retired and needed somewhere to put all the noticing. We clear blowdowns off the trails, fix erosion with water bars and steps, rebuild cairns, and repaint the blazes, which is the relevant bit. So let me explain blazes properly for anyone who doesn't hike. A blaze is a painted mark on a tree, or sometimes a rock, that tells a hiker they're on the right path. Different trails use different colors and shapes, so you can tell them apart where they cross. Our section uses a particular shade of blue, a specific blue, mixed to the association spec, and a particular shape, a simple vertical rectangle about 6 inches tall and 2 wide, painted at about eye level, on trees chosen so that from any one blaze, you can always see the next one ahead of you. That's the whole principle of it. You should never be able to stand at a blaze and not see the next. It's a chain of confidence, leading you along. I have painted thousands of these. Thousands. I could do one in my sleep. And more to the point, I know exactly where every single blaze on my section is, because I'm the one who maintains them, and because, being the sort of man I am, I keep a log, a proper log, with a GPS point for every blaze, the date it was last painted, the condition of the tree it's on, the lot. My section has, or had, 312 blazes. I knew them the way you know the rooms of your own house in the dark. In the spring before last, I'm walking my section at the start of the season to plan the year's work, log in hand, GPS in pocket, and I start noticing blazes that aren't mine. Same blue. Exactly the same blue, which is the first thing that snagged me, because that blue is mixed to spec, and you can't just buy it, and a freelancing hiker with a paint pen would never match it. Same shape, the same vertical rectangle, roughly the same height off the ground, but in places where I knew for an absolute certainty, with the log right there in my hand to confirm it, that there was no blaze, because I maintained them, because I had never painted one there, because 312 was the number and these were extra. And the extra ones were leading off the trail subtly. That was the thing that got the surveyor in me sitting up. Not a sharp turnoff into the woods that any fool would question. Subtle. The first false blaze would be just slightly to the left of where the true trail ran, just a few feet off the line. So little you'd not think twice, you'd just drift toward it the way you naturally walk toward the next blaze, and then 30 or 40 feet on, another, a little further left still, and another past that, further. Each one only a small angle off from the last, but they accumulated, the way a small, steady error accumulates, which is a thing a surveyor knows in his bones, and following them, blaze to trusting blaze, would take you gradually, gently, persuasively off the established trail and down the side of the ridge into a drainage that the real trail very deliberately swings wide of and avoids, because that drainage steepens as it goes and then it cliffs out, a sheer drop of a good 60 feet onto rock, hidden until you're nearly on it by the way the ground rolls over. My first thought, naturally the obvious thought, is that some well-meaning idiot has been freelancing. Some hiker with a paint pen and a notion that they were helping, or some local kids mucking about, or somebody who genuinely got the trail wrong and corrected it for the next person. It happens, people do daft and dangerous things with the best intentions. So, being me, I set about documenting all the false blazes so I could paint them over and put it right. I photographed each one. I logged a GPS point for each one. I counted them. 19 false blazes that first day, marching in their gentle leftward curve off the trail and down toward the drainage, stopping about 40 feet short of where the ground began to steepen in earnest. Two things over the following weeks stopped me absolutely cold and turned this from a nuisance into the thing I've not been able to stop thinking about. The first is the paint. We'd actually had a complaint around that time from another part of the network about someone vandalizing trees, and the association wanted to know whether it was our own spec paint being pinched and misused or some other product. So they had a sample of one of these odd marks analyzed by an obliging fellow at a lab who did it as a favor, and the report came back, and it did not say what anyone expected. It said the marks were not applied. There was no layer of paint sitting on top of the bark. There was no paint at all. By any test he ran, the blue was in the wood. The discoloration penetrated down into the grain itself, as though the tree had grown that exact color, in that exact rectangular shape, which trees do not do, which is not a thing that occurs in nature or by any process the man could name. And he rang me up personally, which labs don't, to ask more than once, with a strain in his voice, whether I was having him on, whether this was some sort of joke at his expense. I told him it was not. He did not seem comforted. The second thing is that there were more of them every time I went back. I'd photograph and log the sequence 1 week, intending to return with paint, to obliterate them. I'd come back the next week, and the original 19 would be exactly where I'd left them, exactly as I'd photographed them. My GPS points landing dead on each one, so it wasn't that I'd miscounted or misremembered or muddled my own log. I'm not a man who does that. But past where the original sequence had ended, continuing the gentle leftward curve, picking up precisely where the last one left off, there would be new ones. Further down, closer to the drainage. The line was being extended, steadily, patiently, week on week, always in the same direction, always continuing the same subtle, deadly curve, always reaching a little further down toward the place where the ground steepened and rolled and dropped away onto the rock. There is one more thing I did before I gave up investigating, and I've gone back and forth on whether to include it because it's the part that frightens me most, and the part I can least prove. I went into the records. The association keeps an archive, decades of it, incident reports, old maintenance logs, correspondence, the lot, much of it never digitized, just boxes in a back room at the regional office. And being the sort of man I am, once the thing had its hooks in me, I went and I sat in that back room for the better part of 3 days, and I read. I was looking for any prior mention of false blazes on my section, anything. A note from a volunteer 50 years before, a complaint, a record of someone having dealt with the same thing and perhaps known something I didn't. I found 2 things. The first is that the drainage at the bottom of the false line, the one that cliffs out, has a name on the very oldest maps, a local name, that does not appear on any modern map, and that the association quietly stopped using a long time ago. I'm not going to write the name down. It's an old word, a dialect word, and a fellow at the county records office translated it for me reluctantly, and it means near enough, the place that calls. The place that calls. That was its name before we came along with our tidy color-coded trails and painted over the old knowledge with a nice safe blue. The second thing is a report, water-stained from a great many years ago, filed by a volunteer whose name meant nothing to me, concerning the recovery of a hiker who had gone over the drop in that drainage. A fatality. And the report is mostly the dry, official business of such things. But there is one line in it. One line the man clearly wasn't supposed to editorialize but couldn't help himself. And it has been in my head ever since I read it, and it will be in my head when I die. He wrote that the deceased had evidently left the trail and descended toward the drop, and that this was difficult to account for because, and here is his line, the blazes below the trail appeared freshly maintained and led directly to the edge, though no maintenance was scheduled or recorded for that section. Freshly maintained blazes leading directly to the edge that nobody had painted, decades before I ever picked up a brush. The line was there long before me. It has been patiently, freshly maintaining itself, leading directly to the edge for longer than I have been alive. And every so often, across the years, it has succeeded and a person has trusted the lovely blue marks all the way down to the place that calls. I sat in that back room with that old report in my hands, and I understood that I was not the first volunteer to find the false line, only the first in a long while, perhaps, to find it and grasp what it was and live to bar it instead of following it down to sea. Properly, the kind of fear that lives in your stomach. The penetrating paint business had already unsettled me past easy explanation, and the steady extension of the line, week on week, by something that was apparently out there, continuing the work between my visits, finished the job. I did not want to be alone at the bottom end of that line, near the drop, painting away at marks that grew in the wood, when whatever was extending it came to do the next stretch. So I did the only thing I could think of that was both sensible and within my power. I did not try to remove the false blazes. The paint business had taught me they couldn't be painted over in any case. The discoloration was in the wood, not on it. Instead, I went to the point where the false line first peeled away from the true trail, the very first false blaze, and there I built a barrier, a real one. I painted a great emphatic cluster of our true blazes on the correct line, impossible to miss, and I strung bright flagging tape across the mouth of the false line, yards of it, and I put up signs, association signs, trail this way with an arrow, and danger, no trail cliff, pointing down the false line, everything short of a fence, so that no hiker, however tired, however much the light was failing, however much they'd been lulled by following a chain of trustworthy blue marks, would ever come to that spot and drift left down the false line toward the drop. I made it so the true way shouted and the false way was barred and labeled with the word cliff. Because that in the end, after the lab and the log, and the weeks of watching the line grow, is the only way I can hold the thing in my head without it tipping me over into somewhere I don't want to go. The marks lead, patiently, convincingly, in our exact house style, in our exact blue, in a curve so subtle and so well judged that a trusting hiker would follow it without a flicker of doubt right to the edge of a 60-foot drop. And they are made continually, week on week, extended ever closer to that edge by something that does not use paint, that puts the color into the living wood in a shape it has clearly studied and learned to copy exactly, something patient enough to work in increments while no one watches. I do not know what it wants. I have a horrible suspicion about what it wants, given where the line leads and what's at the bottom of the drop, and I do not care to write the suspicion down even now. I only know that I will not let it have it, not on my section. I've handed the section over to a younger volunteer now. My hip's gone, and I can't do the miles anymore. A good lass, sensible. I walked her up to the barrier myself on a clear day, and I showed her the flagging and the signs and the false line curving away down toward the drop, and I told her the barrier was to be maintained, refreshed every season, never taken down, never questioned, and that she was not, under any circumstances, to go down the false line to investigate, nor to bother trying to remove the odd marks, because they couldn't be removed. And she looked at me the way the young look at an old man giving strange firm orders about a perfectly ordinary-looking patch of woods, and she said she would, and I believe she meant it. She thinks I'm a bit eccentric. That's all right, let her think it. The flagging stays up and the signs stay up, and the word cliff stays painted at the head of that false line, and nobody trusting follows the blue marks down to the edge. And that is the only thing in this whole business I have any power over. So it is the thing I hold. Maintain the barrier. That's all I ask of her. And now it's all I ask of you. If you ever find yourself maintaining a trail, and you come across a chain of perfect blazes leading gently, trustingly, somewhere the trail has no business going, don't follow them to see. Bar the way, and warn the next person, and let it be. Story 8. Hey, so this is going to be long and rambly, and I'm sorry in advance. My therapist actually says I process things by over-explaining them, and you're about to find out firsthand that she's completely right about that. But I think about this constantly, like genuinely constantly. It's been almost 10 years, and it still surfaces in my head at least once a week. And I've never told the full version of it to anyone, not even the therapist. She's got the medium version. So here's the full one. You can cut it down however you need. When I was 19, I worked a summer at a camp. And I want to be clear up front, it wasn't some creepy, isolated, middle-of-nowhere camp. It was a big, real, well-run, organized place. The kind hundreds of kids cycle through over a summer in week-long sessions, with cabins and a dining hall and a swimming waterfront and arts and crafts and the whole deal. I was a counselor. It was honestly one of the best jobs I ever had, and I'd have gone back the next summer for sure if not for the thing I'm about to tell you, which ended camp for me forever. So the camp itself sat right up against a really big stretch of forest. And I don't mean a little patch of woods, I mean serious forest. The camp was sort of a developed island at the edge of a whole lot of wild country that went back for miles and miles. State land, the kind of place where if you walked in far enough and the wrong way, you genuinely would not come out. And there were trails that went from the camp into the edge of that forest that we used for day hikes with the kids, nature walks, that kind of thing. But it was all very controlled, very by the book. You signed out a group, you took a radio, you took another counselor as a buddy, you stayed strictly on the marked, maintained trails, you counted heads constantly, and you were back by a set time and you signed back in. I did probably 20 of these hikes over the course of the summer, and they were lovely and completely uneventful. Kids finding cool bugs, somebody always needing to pee immediately, the usual. The thing didn't happen on one of those. It happened on a hike that wasn't even officially a hike. It was the staff. So we had this tradition the counselors did that on one of our nights off during the summer, the older staff would take the newer staff out on the short loop trail to a clearing that had a really nice view. And we'd hang out there for a while. And it was technically against camp rules to be out on the trails at night. You weren't supposed to, but everyone did it. Every single summer, it was this whole rite of passage bonding thing. The night the new counselors get taken to the clearing. Nothing bad, no drinking even, really. Mostly just sitting around talking and looking at the view and feeling like adults out past curfew. So there's a group of us out there one night, maybe 8, 9 of us, no kids obviously, just staff. And we're up at the clearing and it's a really nice night. Warm, clear. We've got a couple of flashlights and a couple of those little battery lanterns. And we're just sitting and talking. The new people getting to know the old people. The whole point of it. And one of the girls, Priya, who was a first summer counselor, kind of stops mid-sentence and goes, "Hey, does anyone else hear a kid crying?" And we all go quiet to listen. And yeah, you could hear it. Faint, off down the slope from the clearing, away from the direction of camp, off in the trees. A kid crying. And not a scream and something's very wrong. Hurt kind of crying. It was that exhausted, hopeless, worn-out crying that really little kids do when they've been crying a long time and have run out of steam. You know the kind, where it's almost rhythmic. Just this tired, hitching sobbing on and on. The saddest sound in the world, honestly. And it was unmistakably a child. There was no mistaking it for an animal or the wind or anything else. Every single one of us heard it clearly. And every single one of us instantly knew it was a little kid crying out there in the dark woods. And here's the thing I really need you to understand, because it's the whole horror of it for me looking back. Our entire job, the whole summer, every bit of our training, every instinct we'd spent 2 months developing as people whose entire purpose was the safety and care of children, all of it, fired at once and said, "Go." A child is lost in the woods, alone, at night and crying, and you go and you get that child immediately. That is not a decision. That is not a thing you weigh. There is a crying child in the dark, and you go. And I'm not exaggerating when I say half the group was already on their feet and moving toward the sound before anyone had said a word. It was that automatic. That deep, that's what we were built into by then. We were a group of people optimized down to the reflex for exactly this. The sound of a child in distress. And the reason I'm alive and unharmed and able to type this to you, or at the very least the reason I personally did not go walking down that slope into the dark trees toward that sound, is our head counselor, a guy named Marcus. Older than the rest of us. Mid-20s, which seemed ancient to us then. And he'd done the job 6 summers running. He was sort of a legend among the staff. Unflappable, kind, the person everyone went to. And Marcus did not get up. Marcus did not move toward the sound. And Marcus said, in this voice, I had never once heard him use all summer, this flat, level, all the warmth pressed out of it voice. He said, "Count the kids." And we all kind of stopped and looked at him, confused. Because what? And he said it again. The same flat way, not louder, not panicked, just absolutely level and absolutely certain. Count the kids, right now. We know exactly how many children are at this camp tonight, and we know exactly where every single one of them is. They're in their cabins. It is 20 minutes to bed check, and every cabin has a counselor in it accounting for every child in it at this exact moment. So count them. Go through it in your head. There is not a single child unaccounted for at this camp. There is not a child in these woods. So, and he let it sit a second. So what is crying? And that stopped everybody dead. Every single one of us, even the ones who'd been on their feet, stopped. Because he was right. And the rightness of it dropped into the middle of the group like a stone into water. It wasn't a public forest with random families in it. It was campland, restricted, fenced-in places. And the only children for miles in any direction were our children, the camp's children, and the entire ironclad system of the place. The thing the whole place ran on was that we knew where every one of those children was, at every moment of every day and at night. That was the job. That was the sacred thing. Head counts and sign-outs and bed checks, we always knew. And it was nearly bed check, and the count was happening in the cabins right then, and every child was in a bunk, being counted by a counselor. And so there could not be, a child out in those woods. It was not possible. And yet the crying went on, down the slope, in the dark, tired and hitching and hopeless, and absolutely unmistakably the crying of a small child. And then it stopped. Just stopped. Mid-cry almost. And the silence after it was worse than the crying had been. This huge listening silence. And Marcus stood up slow, and he said, same flat voice, "We're going back to camp now, all of us, together. Nobody goes down that slope. We take the loop back the long way, and we don't stop." And nobody argued. Not one person. We got up and we went, and we did not go back down the direct trail that led past where the sound had been. Marcus took us the long way around the loop. And the thing I will never forget, the image that's burned into me, is that Marcus walked at the very back of the group the entire way. And he walked half turned around, sort of sideways, almost backward, keeping his face toward the dark, behind us the whole time, watching the way we'd come, walking our whole group home, while never once taking his eyes off the woods at our backs. This grown man we all looked up to, walking backward through the forest in the dark, guarding the rear. And that more than anything is what told me in my body that this was real and serious, and that Marcus was afraid, truly afraid, of something specific, something he half expected to come up the slope behind us. We got back to camp. We did bed check, and every single child was accounted for, everyone. All present, all in their bunks, the little ones already asleep, every cabin's count correct and complete. Not one child of the camp's children anywhere, but exactly where they were supposed to be. All of them. I found Marcus the next day, away from everyone, and I asked him, "What was that last night? What happened? What was that crying?" And he didn't really want to talk about it, I could tell, but he gave me something. He said he'd heard it himself, his first summer 6 years before, on the same loop, at the same clearing, the same tired crying down the same slope. And he said that an older counselor had been there that night too, the way he'd been there for us. And that older counselor had told him then exactly what he'd told us. Count the kids. And he said that counselor told him afterward that it got passed down, that somebody always made sure the new staff went to the clearing and that somebody who knew always went with them. Specifically so that the one time it happened, the one night out of a summer it might happen, there'd be someone there who knew to say count the kids before anybody walked down the slope. Like a piece of knowledge the camp kept alive and its staff on purpose, handed from older to younger, summer after summer, without ever quite writing it down. And Marcus said he figured he'd just done his part, passed it to us the way it got passed to him, and that as long as somebody at that clearing always knew to count the kids, it'd be fine. And I asked him the question I had to ask. I said, what happens if nobody counts? If a group goes out there some summer and there's no one who knows, and they hear it and they go down the slope toward it? And Marcus looked at me for a long moment, a really long moment. And then he said, quiet. I don't know. And I don't ever want to be the summer we find out. And that was the end of the conversation. He wouldn't say anymore, and I didn't push it. Actually, no. I do know one more thing, and I keep almost leaving it out, because it's the part that makes it worse. And I've decided I shouldn't leave out the part that makes it worse just because I'd like to. A few years after, I was at a wedding actually, and I ran into another guy who'd worked at that same camp, different summers than me. We didn't overlap, but you know how it is. You find out you both did the same weird summer job and you get to talking. And at some point, a couple drinks in, I tested the water. I said, hey, did you ever do the thing where the old staff take the new staff out to the clearing at night? And his face changed, just a little, just for a second, but it changed. And he said, yeah, we did that. And I said, did anything ever? And I didn't even finish it. And he said, quiet, you heard it too. Not a question. You heard it too. And I said, yeah. And we just looked at each other for a second across this happy, loud wedding. Two grown men who'd both heard a child crying in the dark woods years apart at the same clearing. And then somebody came up to us, and the moment broke, and we never finished talking about it. But before it broke, he said one thing, fast, like he had to get it out. He said the guy who took his group out, his version of Marcus, told them afterward that it wasn't every year. That some summers you go out to the clearing and nothing happens, and it's just a nice night. And the new kids never know there was ever anything to know. But that you always send someone who knows anyway, every single time. No exceptions, because you can't predict the summers it happens. And the one time you send a group out there without someone who knows to say, count the kids, is the one time it'll happen. And there'll be nobody to stop them walking down the slope. He said it like a rule he took dead seriously. And then he said the thing I think about most. He said his guide told them that there was a summer way back, before any of us, that something did happen. That he didn't know the details. Nobody did. It was before his time, and it had gotten vague the way these things do. But that the reason the whole count the kids tradition existed, the reason it got taken so seriously and passed down so carefully, was that one summer, a long time ago, it hadn't been stopped. That's all he knew. One summer, a long time ago, a group went out, and there was nobody there who knew. And it hadn't been stopped. And after that summer, the camp made very sure, forever, that there was always someone at the clearing who knew to count. He didn't know what hadn't been stopped meant. I didn't ask because I didn't want to know, and I still don't, and I've spent a lot of energy over the years, specifically not looking into it, not searching old newspapers, not trying to find out if a counselor or camper ever went missing from that camp a long time ago. Because some part of me has decided I'm better off not knowing whether the tradition that saved my group was bought, originally, with somebody who walked down the slope toward a crying child that wasn't there, back when there was nobody to say count the kids. I think it was. I think that's exactly what the tradition is. A scar the place turned into a rule, so it would never happen twice. I didn't go back the next summer. I've never been able to bring myself to. And I genuinely don't know if the tradition's still going all these years later, if there's still staff who take the new counselors out to that clearing on a night off, if there's still always somebody among them who knows to say, count the kids before anyone moves toward the sound. I hope so. I really deeply hope so. I've thought about trying to find out, contacting the camp, but what would I even say? So I just hope. Because here's the thing that's haunted me for 10 years, more than the crying itself, more than Marcus walking backward through the dark. It was the most natural thing in the world to want to go toward it. That's what gets me. It didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a child needed us. It used the very best thing about us, the thing we were proudest of, the reflex we'd built all summer to protect children. And it turned that exact reflex into the hook. 8 or 9 people who'd given their whole summer to caring for kids, and the thing in the woods knew, somehow it knew, the one exact sound that would make every single one of us stand up and walk toward it in the dark without thinking. It didn't roar or threaten, it cried like a lost child, because it knew what we were, and it knew what we'd do. And the only thing that saved us was one man who'd been taught by another man to stop and count, and to understand that the surest sign it isn't a child is that it cannot be one, that there are no children out there. So count them. Always count them first. Story 9. I am going to write this in the plainest language I am capable of, because I am an engineer by training and by trade, and I have spent my entire professional life on the disciplined elimination of explanations until only the true one remains. And in this particular case, I have run completely out of explanations to eliminate, and that, precisely that, is the only reason I am willing to bother a stranger with it. I want to state at the very outset, for the record, that I do not believe in anything. No ghosts, no spirits, nothing of the sort, never have. I am writing to you not in spite of that, but because of it. I am writing because I am a confirmed and lifelong skeptic who has been left holding a thing he cannot explain and cannot make go away. And skeptics, when that happens to them, have nowhere to put it, no comfortable framework to file it under, and so it just sits in you. And I need to set it down somewhere outside my own skull. My wife and I bought a cabin some years ago now. A mountain property, modest, the back boundary of it running up against a large tract of protected forest, state land that can never be logged or developed, which was in fact the entire selling point for us. We are not outdoorsy people in any extreme sense. We don't climb mountains or sleep in the dirt, but we both like quiet, and we both like a gentle walk in the trees, and the idea of a little house backed up against forest that would stay forest forever appealed to us deeply. We bought it, and we spent, I would estimate, the better part of 2 years of weekends and holidays up there, entirely happily, with nothing whatsoever out of the ordinary occurring before any of what I'm about to describe began. I emphasize the 2 ordinary happy years because I want you to understand this was not a case of 2 nervous people moving into a spooky cabin and frightening themselves. We were comfortable there. We loved it there. For 2 years, it was simply our happy, quiet place. There is a large window in the main room of the cabin that faces the forest. A big single pane of glass, facing more or less due north, looking out across perhaps 40 feet of cleared ground to the tree line where the protected forest begins. We positioned our reading chairs by it, and my wife, who paints as a hobby and is rather good, set up her easel by it because that window gets the steady north light. And any painter will tell you north light is the good light. It doesn't shift and glare across the day the way other light does. It stays even and true, which is what you want for seeing color properly. So my wife spent a great many contented hours at that window, painting the forest in the light, facing north into the trees. The first time, my wife mentioned it completely offhand, the way you'd mention a draft or a squeaky hinge. She said she kept thinking she saw someone standing at the tree line out of the corner of her eye while she was painting. Just a sense of a figure, off at the edge of her vision, that wasn't there when she looked straight at it. And that it was distracting, putting her off her work. And could we perhaps get a blind for that window? I said, of course, and I said it was very likely deer. We got deer at the tree line all the time. A deer standing still in the dappled shade reads as a vertical shape, a figure at the edge of your eye. And we got a blind, and I considered the matter closed. I genuinely did. I thought no more about it. But I am a measurer. It is, my wife would tell you, a genuine compulsion of mine. A need to resolve small discrepancies into hard data. And once she had said it, planted the idea of a figure at the tree line, I found that I too began to catch it. The impression of a figure, always at the very edge of vision, never present when I turned to look at it directly, just at the tree line, just where the trunks began. And being the man I am, this would not do. An unresolved perception is intolerable to me. I decided to settle it the only way I know how, which is with an instrument and a method. I set up a camera on a tripod inside the main room, aimed steadily out the north window at the tree line, and I set it to take one photograph automatically every 30 seconds, all day long, from first light to last. And I let it run for a week. And then I sat down to do what I do, which is go carefully through the data, all of it, every frame, thousands of frames, because that is the only honest way. You don't skim, you check every one. And here's precisely what I found, and I'm going to be exact about it because the exactness is the entire substance of the thing. In isolation, examined one at a time, every single frame contains nothing whatsoever. Trees, just the tree line, the trunks, the cleared ground, ordinary, undisturbed forest. I went through all of them, every frame of the entire week, thousands of images, and I am genuinely thorough. It is the one thing I am unfailingly good at. And there is not one single frame, not one, that contains a person, a figure, a face, an anomaly, anything. Photographically, frame by frame, the week was completely empty. Nothing was ever there. But when you play them in sequence, when you take the week of still frames and run them in order quickly as a kind of crude stop-motion film, which I did, assembling them into a video at speed, the trees move. And I do not mean swaying in the wind. I accounted for wind. The wind moves the canopy and the small branches in an obvious, natural, irregular way that the eye reads instantly as wind and dismisses. This was not that. This was the trunks. The spacing between certain specific tree trunks at the tree line changes from frame to frame in a way that solid standing trees do not and cannot do. A gap of a certain width between two trunks in one frame is narrower in the next frame, 30 seconds later, and narrower still or gone in the one after that, and then back to full width in the one after that. As though something the precise width of a tree trunk and the precise dull gray-brown color of a tree trunk and capable of the precise absolute stillness of a tree trunk were standing among the real trees at the tree line and moving from one position to another only exactly in the half-second intervals between my photographs, in the dead time when the shutter was closed, so that the camera never once, not in a week, not in thousands of frames, caught it in motion. It was only ever caught at rest. And at rest, in any single frame, it was indistinguishable from a tree. The only evidence that it was ever there at all, the only trace it left, is that the forest behind it, the pattern of gaps and trunks, does not hold still across the week the way a real forest holds still. The forest rearranges itself slightly between frames, in the places where the thing or the things stood and moved and stood again, always and only in the blind moments. When the camera was not looking, I have the sequence. I assembled it, I watched it, and then I did the responsible thing, and I showed it to two people whose judgment and rigor I trust as much as my own. The first was an old friend, not technical, and he watched it through twice in silence, and then he asked me very quietly to please delete it, and he did not want to talk about it. And he has been somewhat strange with me ever since, and I don't entirely blame him. The second was a software engineer, a thoroughly hard-nosed materialist, debug everything sort of man, exactly the sort you want. And he did not believe it for a moment. He was certain it was an artifact of my method, a compression error from assembling the video, a stitching mistake, a lens or focus issue, a rolling shutter problem, something mundane in the processing, and he asked me for the raw frames, the untouched originals, straight off the camera, so he could prove it. And he took them away and he spent an entire weekend on them, properly the way he works. And at the end of the weekend, he telephoned me. And I've known this man 20 years, and his voice was not right. And he told me the raw frames are clean. Individually clean, unaltered, genuine. No artifacts, no compression issues, no stitching, nothing. The movement, he said, is real. It's in the source data. It is genuinely there, in the original untouched frames, the rearrangement of the trees across the week. And there is no error in my method or the camera or the assembly that can account for it. The only thing that accounts for it is that the trees, some of them, the ones that move, are not trees. And then he asked me the same question my wife had asked me weeks before. The question that is the real horror at the bottom of all of this. The question I had been not asking myself with everything I had. He asked me, how many of them are there? Because that is the thing the week of footage tells you, once you can bear to count. It is not one shifting trunk, it is several. At least 3 by my best careful count. 3 distinct positions along the tree line where the forest rearranges itself between frames. 3 things holding perfectly still as trees whenever the shutter opens. 3 of them distributed across the tree line facing the house. And they are not in the same places at the end of the week as at the beginning. Tracked across the 7 days, frame by frame, all 3 are nearer the window in the final day's footage than they were in the first days. Not by much, but measurably consistently all 3 closer. Across the week, the 3 things that can hold as still as trees and only move when no one is looking had come by a measured margin closer to the one north-facing window. The window where a woman liked to sit for hours in the good steady light, with her back to the room and her face to the trees and paint. There's a further measurement I have never told anyone. Not my wife, not the two friends, no one. And I'm only setting it down now because I have decided that a record ought to be complete or not exist at all. When my engineer friend confirmed the movement was real and the source data, I went back to the footage one final time, and before I deleted it, and I did the thing I do, the thing I cannot help doing. I measured the rate. I tracked each of the 3 positions across the 7 days, and I worked out how far each one had advanced toward the window, on average, per day. And the 3 rates were not random. They were nearly identical to one another. The 3 things advancing in a kind of loose unison. And more than that, the rate was constant, linear. Each day the same small measured distance closer, no faster, no slower. A steady approach, the way a thing moves when it is not in any hurry at all, because it knows precisely how much time it has and exactly how the arithmetic comes out. So of course I did the arithmetic. I could not stop myself. I took the measured rate of approach and the measured remaining distance from the tree line to the window, and I divided the one into the other the way you would for any approaching object to find the time to arrival. And I am not going to write the number down, the number of days, because it is a real number and it is not a large one, and my wife may someday read this. But I will tell you that having calculated it, I understood why my engineer friend's voice had not been right on the telephone, and I understood why my old non-technical friend had asked me to delete it and had been strange with me ever since. They had both, I think, done the same arithmetic, each in his own way. The hard-nosed one with numbers, and the gentle one with just a feeling in his gut, and arrived at the same place, that the approach was not random and not idle, and not without a destination, and that the destination was a window, and that there was a date by which the 3 of them would reach it. We sold before that date. By a comfortable margin, I made sure of that. I am nothing if not careful with a margin, and I have wondered more than I'd like what the people we sold it to would see if they ever thought to point a camera out that north window and take a photograph every 30 seconds for a week and then play it back fast. Whether the 3 things are still out there at the tree line, having reset to their starting distance when we left, patiently beginning the same slow, constant approach toward the same window all over again, now with new people inside it. Or whether it was never about the cabin or the window at all, but about us, about my wife at her easel. And the 3 of them have simply followed and are out there now at the edge of wherever we are, holding still as trees whenever I think to look, advancing at their steady measured rate whenever I don't. I have not set up the camera again. I told you I keep it but never use it, and that is true. But I'll be honest with you about the real reason, which is not that I have no use for it. It is that I'm afraid of what the arithmetic would say about the new distance, and whether the clock simply started over, or whether it never stopped. We sold the cabin. We listed it within the month, and we took a real financial loss on the speed of the sale, and I did not care in the slightest. And my wife, who is a great deal braver than I am, agreed to sell it instantly before I'd even finished making the case, which told me something I have never asked her to confirm, which is that she had arrived at the same conclusion I had, perhaps earlier than I had, and had simply been waiting quietly at her easel for me to be the one to say it out loud first. I did not tell the buyers anything. I have thought hard about the ethics of that, and I stand by it, because there is genuinely nothing to tell that would not sound like the ravings of a madman. There is no defect in the property. There is no smell, no sound, no cold spot, no broken lock, no figure in any photograph, no evidence of any kind that a reasonable person, that I myself a few years ago, would have accepted for 1 second. There is only a film of a forest, assembled from a week of perfectly innocent still photographs, that holds completely still whenever it is watched, and quietly rearranges itself whenever it believes you have looked away with at least 3 of its trees coming a measured fraction closer each day to a single window. I have kept the camera. I do not know why. I have not used it since, and I never will. But I did not keep the footage. My engineer friend was right about a great many things over the years, and he was right about this. The last thing he said to me before he asked me never to bring it up again. Some data, he said, you do not store. So I deleted it, every copy, the raw frames and the assembled film both, and I watched the deletion complete. And I have only my memory of it now and my measurements written down in a notebook. And I find, to my own surprise, that I'm at peace with having no proof, because proof is the last thing on earth I want. I wanted my whole life to be the man who measures the thing and resolves it, and I measured it. And it resolved into the one explanation I had no way to eliminate, and now I do not believe in nothing anymore, and I would give a great deal to have my comfortable nothing back. Story 10. So, my abuela used to tell this story, and for most of my life I thought it was just one of her stories. You know how grandmothers have their stories, the ones that are half warning and half scolding, and you never can tell how much of it really happened and how much got added on over the years to make a point to a misbehaving grandchild. She had a whole collection of them. This was one of the dark ones, one she didn't tell often, and only when she felt like we needed it. And I rolled my eyes at it the way every grandchild rolls their eyes at the old country stories. And then, years later, when I was grown and a mother myself, the thing in it happened to me, more or less. And I have not rolled my eyes at it since, and now I find I have to tell you both versions, hers and mine. Because honestly, they only mean what they mean when you put them side by side. Here's her version, the way she told it. When she was a young woman, back in the old country, before she ever came north, she lived in a small village at the foot of forested mountains. Real mountains, real forests, old forest. The kind that had been there forever and that people had a long, careful relationship with. And the rule there, she said, the rule that everybody in the village knew and that the children were taught before they were taught much else, was this: you do not answer if the forest calls you in a voice you love. That was exactly how she put it, a voice you love. She said the mountain, that's the word she used, the mountain, as if it were one thing. She said the mountain could learn the voices of your dead and your living both, that it listened and it learned, and that it would wait until the evening, the in-between time, the dusk, and then it would call to you from just inside the tree line, in a voice you knew and loved and trusted with your whole heart. Your mother's voice, your child's, your dead husband's, calling you by your name, the way only someone who loved you says your name, calling you to come in to the trees. And she said the only protection, the only one, was the rule. You never answer, and you never go, no matter how certain you are that it's really them, because being certain was exactly the trap. The mountain made you certain. That was its art, its whole craft, the making of certainty. The more sure you were, the more it was working on you, not the less. And she told us, in the low voice she saved for the dark stories, that her own aunt had answered, once, long before, had heard her own mother's voice at the tree line one evening and been so completely sure, so flooded with love and certainty, that she had answered and walked in among the trees toward it, and that they had searched for her for 3 days, and that on the 3rd day they found her, sitting by a stream deep in the forest, alive, unharmed, but with no memory at all of the 3 days she'd been gone, none, a hole where the days should be, and that she was never quite right again after, never quite all there, and that she would not speak of whatever she did or didn't remember, not ever, not even as an old woman on her deathbed when her family begged her to unburden herself. She took whatever it was with her. That was Abuela's story. I heard it a dozen times growing up, and I half believed it as a small child, and disbelieved it entirely as a teenager, and filed it away as colorful old country superstition as an adult, Until, here's my version. I'm grown, married, 2 kids of my own. We're on a family day out at a state park, a popular one, the kind with a paved visitor center and a gift shop and a snack bar and clean restrooms. Families absolutely everywhere. Kids on scooters, the whole thing, about as far from a haunted old country forest as you can get. Broad daylight, a bright, clear afternoon. We're walking one of the easy, interpretive loop trails, the kind with little numbered signs about the trees, wide and well-maintained, dozens of other families on it within sight at any moment. My youngest, my daughter, is maybe 6 at the time, and she's a little ways ahead of me on the trail, where I can see her clearly just being 6, looking at things, and I'm ambling along behind her, and my husband and our older one are a bit further back. And I hear my mother call my name. My mother, who had died by then about 4 years earlier. Clear as anything. From the trees off to the left of the trail, my name. In her voice. And not just roughly her voice, I mean her voice. Exactly. The precise timbre of it. And more than that, the way she said my name, with this particular little lift at the end of it that she always had. This small musical upturn that was hers and nobody else's. That I would know anywhere in the world, that I had not heard in 4 years, and had ached, physically ached, to hear just once more. And it called my name in exactly that way, from the trees, and I stopped dead on that trail, completely stopped, with my heart up in my throat, because for 1 second, for one single terrible, wonderful second, I was sure. I was utterly, completely, flooded with certainty, sure that my mother was there, just there in the trees, and that all I had to do was go to her. Every cell in my body turned toward those trees. 4 years of grief and love and missing her rose up in me all at once and pulled hard toward the sound, toward her, toward going. And then, into that second, came Abuela. Not really. I don't mean a ghost. I don't mean I heard her. I mean, her story came up in me. The way a thing somebody drilled into you when you were small comes up at exactly the moment it was drilled in for, without you summoning it. The word's just there. You never answer and you never go, because being sure is the trap. The more sure you are, the more it's working you. And I stood frozen on that bright trail and I looked, really looked hard, straight at the trees where my mother's voice had come from, and there was nothing there. Just forest. Ordinary, sunlit afternoon forest, with families strolling past the very spot without so much as a glance, hearing nothing, because there was nothing for them to hear. And while I stood there looking at the empty trees, the voice came again. My name. My mother. That little lift at the end. Pulling at the absolute center of me, at something below thought, below reason, the deepest, oldest chord in me, the one that ties a daughter to her mother and does not come untied by death. And I did the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Harder than childbirth, harder than burying her in the first place. I turned away from my own mother's voice. I made myself believe my abuela over my own certainty, over my own mother calling my name. And I turned away. And I called my daughter, Sharp, called her back to me right now. And she came and I picked her up. Even though she was much too big to be picked up and squirmed and protested, I picked her up and held her against me. And I turned around and I walked back the way we'd come, fast, toward my husband, toward the visitor center, toward the thickest crowd of families I could aim for. And I did not look at the trees again. And I did not stop walking until we were back on the pavement with people all around us. And the voice did not follow us out of the forest. My husband thinks I had a moment of grief, a grief hallucination, which is a real and documented thing. The mind conjuring the voice of someone you've lost, especially around an anniversary. And he's gentle about it, and I love him for it, and he's very probably right. I am not a foolish woman. I know what grief does. I know the mind makes voices out of longing. I know the most likely explanation by far is that a sad daughter on a nice day heard, in the rustle of leaves and the noise of a crowd, the thing she most wanted in the world to hear. I know that. I hold that explanation, and I think it's probably true, and most days it's enough. But here's the thing I keep coming back to, the one detail I can never quite walk past, that keeps the other explanation alive in the back of my mind no matter how I reason with myself. It didn't call my daughter's name. It called mine. My daughter was the one ahead of me. My daughter was the one closer to the trees, the smaller one, the more vulnerable one, the one a thing in the woods would surely want if a thing in the woods wants children, which the stories all say it does. And it did not call her. It called me, in a voice it could not have made me hear unless it knew, somehow, the exact voice I could not refuse, the one voice in all the world that would override 4 years of sense and turn my whole body toward the trees. It reached past the child, who would have been easy, and it called the mother in her dead mother's voice, because the mother was the one it could be sure of. And a grief hallucination is the mind reaching for comfort. But this didn't comfort. This called. It wanted me to come, and it knew exactly how to make me want to. And the only thing in this whole world that stopped me was an old woman's story I'd spent my whole life rolling my eyes at. There's a piece I have to add because it changed the whole shape of it for me. And it's the reason I went from a woman with a strange afternoon to a woman who teaches her child a rule. After that day, I couldn't let it alone. I'm not a superstitious person, I want that on the record. I work in healthcare, I believe in evidence, and I told myself I was going to settle this rationally, find the ordinary explanation, and put my mind at rest. So I started asking questions in my own family, the older ones, my mother's surviving sister, the cousins of that generation, the keepers of the family's old country business. I told them lightly, like it was just a funny thing, that I'd been thinking about Abuela's old story about the voices at the tree line. Did anyone else remember it? Did anyone know if it was based on anything? And the reaction I got was not light. My great aunt, Abuela's younger sister, who is very old now and very sharp, went quiet on the phone for a long moment when I brought it up. And then she asked me in a careful voice why I was asking. Not what do you remember, not, oh yes, that old story. Why are you asking? And when I finally just told her the truth, the trail, the voice, my mother's voice, my name, she was silent again. And then she said, "You didn't go. Tell me you didn't go." And I said, "No, I didn't go." I turned around, and I heard her let out a breath like she'd been holding it for the length of my whole story. And then she told me the part Abuela never told us children, that it wasn't just a great aunt, a generation back, who'd answered and walked into the trees and come back 3 days later wrong and silent. She told me it was a pattern in the family, going back as far as the family's memory reached, that every so often, not every generation, but often enough, someone of our blood would hear a beloved voice at the tree line and answer it. And that of the ones who answered, some never came back at all. And the ones who did come back came back like the great aunt, with a hole in them where some days had been. Never quite right after, never able or willing to say what they'd seen. And she told me the rule, the exact rule Abuela taught me. You never answer and you never go. And being sure is the trap was not a quaint old saying. It was a survival instruction. It was the single most important thing the family had to pass down. More important than any property or name or recipe. The thing that had been kept alive and taught to every child for as far back as anyone knew. Specifically and only so that when it happened to you, and in our family it might, the rule would be there in you, planted deep, ready to plant your feet and turn you around. She said Abuela had taught it to me because Abuela believed I might need it one day, and I had needed it. And the rule had worked, the way it was built to work, surfacing from way down, underneath at the one moment it mattered. And I had turned around, and I had come home, and so had my daughter, who'd been walking ahead of me toward the trees. My great aunt asked me before we hung up whether I'd taught it to my own children yet. And I realized with a cold drop in my stomach that I hadn't, not really, not properly, that I'd been treating it as a colorful family legend and not as the thing it actually was. A piece of knowledge my family had carried across oceans and generations at the cost of the ones who learned it the hard way. Knowledge that had just that very week kept me out of the trees, and I promised her I would. That night, I taught my daughter the rule that very night, sitting on the edge of her bed. You never answer and you never go, and being sure is the trap. She didn't understand it, of course. She was 6. She rolled her eyes at me, 6 years old, and already rolling her eyes at her mother, and asked, could she go to sleep now? And I thought, good. Roll your eyes. I don't need you to understand it now. I just need it in you. I need it planted down deep the way Abuela planted it in me, so that someday, years from now, when you're grown and standing on some bright, ordinary trail, and you hear a voice you love calling you in among the trees, calling you by name with all the certainty in the world, some old foolish rule from your eye-rolling mother surfaces from way down underneath and plants your feet and turns you around. That's all I want. That's the whole inheritance. The only thing I have to pass down that matters more than money. You never answer. You never go. And being sure is the trap. Story 11. Posting this from a throwaway account because half my coworkers watch your channel, and I would absolutely never live it down. The ribbing would last until I retired, but it's true. Every word of it. And I've held it in for a couple years and I need it out of me. So here it is, and if you read it on the channel, please, for the love of God, don't say where it came from. I drive a snowplow, have for a long time. Mountain roads, the kind that close in real weather, the kind with the switchbacks and the runaway truck ramps and the guardrails, with a whole lot of nothing on the far side of them. I work nights mostly because that's when the snow needs moving. You plow through the night so the road's passable for folks by morning. It's solitary work, and the truth is, I love it. It suits me. It's just me and the truck and the headlights and the snow coming down in the beams hour after hour. And most nights, absolutely nothing happens that's worth telling anybody about. That's the job. Long, quiet hours and a clear road by dawn. I've done it through more winters than I'll admit to, and I've seen weather that'd curl your hair, and I've never been a nervous guy about any of it. You can't be doing this. The mountain at night in a storm is just my office. This was January, a real storm, a heavy one. The kind where they close the road behind you and you're the last thing moving on the whole mountain. I'm working a high section, a stretch that runs right along the edge of a big national forest, climbing, and the plan is to plow up to the turnaround at the top of the section and then plow back down, clearing both directions. Snow's coming down hard, the kind of hard where your visibility is maybe 40 feet past the headlights, and beyond that it's just a wall of white streaks and then black. And the wipers can barely keep up, and you're leaning forward over the wheel watching the road come at you a little at a time. And I see a guy walking up the road ahead of me. Same direction I'm going, uphill, on the road itself, right up the middle of my lane, in the storm. At 2 a.m, no car anywhere, no broken down vehicle on the shoulder, no nothing. Miles and miles from the nearest anything. Just a man on foot, in a heavy dark coat with the hood up, walking up the middle of the mountain road through a blizzard. And obviously I stop. Obviously. You do not drive past a person on foot on a mountain road in a blizzard at 2 a.m. That is how people freeze to death. And I've plowed past the spots where people froze to death. I know that road's whole grim history. So I slow down and I pull up behind him, easy, not wanting to startle him. And I roll my window down and I call out over the engine and the wind, "Hey buddy, you okay? You need a ride? You can't be out here." And he doesn't turn around. He just keeps walking. Same steady pace, same direction, like. He doesn't hear me at all. And I figure, okay, fair enough, and the engine's loud and the wind is louder and he's got a hood up over his ears, he probably can't hear me. So I ease the truck forward to come up alongside him, slow so I can get level with him, and try again where he can see me. and I'm pulling up next to him, and I get my first real look at him in the side glow of the lights, the spill off the headlights and the cab light, and something is wrong. And at first I can't put my finger on what. It's just a wrongness. And then it lands on me, and it lands hard. There's no breath. It's maybe 10 degrees out. Below with the wind, and here's a man in a heavy coat, walking uphill, exerting himself, climbing through snow, and there is no breath coming off of him. No cloud, no plume, nothing. You can't help making breath fog in that cold. Your body just does it. Every living warm thing does it. I could see my own breath blowing out the window in the cab light, and there was not one wisp of it coming off this man, walking and working his way up the hill. None. And once I'd seen that, once I'd noticed the breath, I'd noticed the rest of it all in a rush. The snow. The snow was coming down so hard, it was covering my windshield between wiper passes, piling on the truck. And it was falling on him too. I could see it falling on him. It wasn't landing. Or it was landing, but it wasn't doing anything. It wasn't building up on his shoulders or his hood the way it was building on everything else. It wasn't melting off him from body heat the way it should either. It was just sort of in front of him, around him, like he was a photograph of a man in a snowstorm, and the real snow was just falling in front of the photograph. And he still hadn't turned around this whole time. I'd pulled right up alongside him, close enough that if my window had been bigger, I could have reached out and touched his shoulder. And he was walking and looking straight ahead up the road, and I had not yet seen his face. And all of a sudden, very suddenly and very completely, every part of me did not want to. I cannot explain to you the certainty of that, the absolute animal certainty that came over me that I must not, under any circumstances, see this man's face. That whatever was under that hood, walking up my mountain in my storm, making no breath while the snow fell in front of him instead of on him, I did not want it to turn around. I did not want it to look at me. I did not want to see what it had for a face. So I did something I've thought about every single day since. I did not offer him the ride again. I did not get out of the truck. I rolled my window up, slow and quiet, and I let off the gas and let the truck drift back behind him again, putting distance between us. And I sat there idling, hanging back behind this figure, walking up the road. And I made a decision, clear as anything, that if he turned around and if that hood started to come around toward me, I was going to throw the truck in reverse and back down that mountain the whole way, blade up, plow be damned, in the dark, in the storm, in reverse, rather than let it face me. And I watched him walk on up the road in my headlight beams. This man the snow refused to land on, getting a little smaller as I hung back. And after maybe 30 seconds, maybe less, he walked right up to the edge of where my headlights reached, that line where the beams give out and the white turns to black, and he was just not there anymore. He didn't step off the road. There was nowhere to step. That stretches guardrail on the downhill side, and cut bank on the uphill. There's no shoulder to vanish onto. And on the far side of the rail, it's a long, long way down. He didn't speed up and walk out of the light. He didn't fade or flicker. He reached the edge of the headlights, and on the next pass of the wipers, the next half second when the glass cleared, he was simply gone. And the road ahead was empty, untouched, smooth, fresh snow with no one on it. And here's the part I only put together after, the part that finishes me every time I think about it. There were never any footprints. The whole time I'd been following him, creeping up behind him and alongside him, the road behind him and my headlights had been smooth. Fresh snow, my own tracks coming up behind me, and ahead of and around him, where a man walking up a snow-covered road leaves a clear line of deep footprints. There was nothing. Smooth snow. He had been walking up the middle of a snow-covered road and leaving no footprints. And I'd been looking right at it the whole time and not letting myself see it. The way I hadn't let myself see the breath or the snow at first, the mind just refusing. And it was only after sitting there in the empty he'd left behind that all three things landed on me at once. No breath, no snow landing, no footprints. I sat there a long time, idling in the dark, in the storm on the empty mountain. And then I did the most cowardly brave thing I've ever done in my life, which is I turned the truck around at the wide spot up at the turnaround very carefully, my hands not quite steady, and I plowed the rest of the route, the whole top section, because it was my job. And people needed that road clear by morning, kids getting to school, folks getting to work, and the job is the job. And I did the entire rest of that section with my doors locked and the radio cranked up loud, talk radio, anything, voices and my eyes locked dead ahead on the road, refusing, absolutely flatly refusing, to so much as glance at the edge of my headlights, at that line where the light gives out, because some deep animal part of me had decided and would not be talked out of it, that if I looked over and saw him there again, standing still this time at the edge of the light, facing me, waiting, I would drive my truck straight off the side of that mountain, trying to get away from him, and that would be how they'd find me in the morning, truck over the rail, no explanation, just another plow driver who lost it on the ice in a bad storm. I'll tell you one more piece, and then I'm done. When I finally got back down to the depot that morning, shaking, having plowed the whole section with the radio blaring and my eyes locked ahead, there was an old boy there, just coming off his own shift. A guy who'd been plowing these mountains since before I had my license, getting on toward retirement. The kind of guy who'd seen everything and said little. And I must have looked rough, because he took one look at me pouring my coffee with both hands, and he said, "Easy, you all right?" And I don't know why I told him. I hadn't planned to tell anybody ever, but it came out of me, the whole thing. The man in the hood, no breath, the snow not landing, the no footprints, all of it just spilled out of me right there by the coffee machine, at the end of the worst night of my working life. And he didn't laugh, that's the thing. I'd braced for him to laugh, half wanted him to, would have been a relief if he had. He didn't. He just listened, the whole way through, nodding slow, and when I was done, he was quiet a minute. And then he asked me one question. He asked me which section. And when I told him the high stretch along the forest, the climbing part, he nodded again like that confirmed something, and he said, "Don't stop for the walkers up there." Just that. Don't stop for the walkers up there. Same as I'd already decided in my own gut. And I said, "You've seen him too." And the old boy looked at me for a long second, and he didn't say yes, and he didn't say no. He just said, "I've seen something I didn't stop for, more than once. And I'm still here to plow," which is more than I can say for everybody who ran this route before me. And he picked up his lunch pail and he went home. And we never talked about it again, not once, in the years before he retired. But every so often after a bad night on that section, we'd catch each other's eye at the depot, and there'd be a kind of understanding in it, and that was all. Don't stop for the walkers up there. Passed to me by a man who'd had it passed to him, I'd bet. The same way by whoever ran the route before him all the way back. I still drive that route. I have to, it's my section, it's my job. And jobs like mine don't grow on trees. But I don't stop for walkers up there anymore. And I know exactly how that sounds, and I know there might come a night when there's a real person up there, a real stranded soul who really needs help. And I'll drive on by, and I will have to live with whatever comes of that. And it sits on me. It truly does. But you weren't there. You didn't see the smooth snow where the footprints should have been. You didn't sit alongside a thing in a hood that made no breath while the snow fell in front of it instead of on it. And I'm telling you, I will not roll that window down again. Not on that mountain. Not in the dark. Not for anything that walks up the middle of the road and won't turn around. If it's a real person, God forgive me. But I don't think the real ones leave no footprints. And until one of them turns around and shows me an honest breathing face, I'm keeping my window up and my eyes ahead and my doors locked all the way to dawn. A quick word, call to action 3 of 3. 2 stories left, and they're a couple of the strongest in the inbox, so stay with me. Before we get into them, if this channel has become part of your routine, the falling asleep to it, the long night drives, the doing the dishes with it playing in the background, the single biggest thing you can do to help is share one video with one person who'd like it. That's it. That's how small channels like this one stay alive. Thank you for being here. Let's finish strong. Story 12. I'll tell this quick and flat because that's the only way I've ever managed to get through telling it the handful of times I have. In any other way, anytime I slow down and let myself really be back in it, I start to come apart, so bear with the bluntness. It's not coldness, it's the opposite. It's a man holding himself together. I was a kid when it happened. 10, maybe 11. On a camping trip with my dad and my uncle and my older cousin. A men's trip, they called it, half a joke since I was barely a man. More like the mascot they brought along, but I lived for those trips, being included with the men. And this one matters to me for a reason that's got nothing to do with the scary part, which is that my dad is gone now. And this trip holds one of the last clear, strong memories I have of him healthy and whole and laughing. Before he got sick, before all of that, so it's precious to me. The whole trip, even with what happened in the middle of it. Maybe more precious because of what happened. I haven't ever gotten that sorted out of my head. How something can be one of your worst memories and sit right up against one of your most treasured ones. The same few days, we were way back in, properly back in, the way my dad and uncle liked it. No cell signal even if we'd had the phones we have now. The nearest road, a long, hard hike out. 3 days in. And on the second night, my cousin, who was 16 and full of 16, who thought he was a grown man and chafed at being out there with the family, snuck off after dark. We pieced it together later that he'd most likely wanted to go off and smoke a cigarette somewhere my uncle wouldn't catch him, or just needed to be away from the adults for a while, the way 16-year-olds do. Needed to feel like his own person out from under his dad's eye. He didn't tell anybody he was going. He just slipped off into the dark, while the rest of us were sitting around the fire, and none of us noticed at first that he'd gone. And then, maybe 20 minutes after he'd slipped off, he came back. Walked right up out of the dark to the fire and sat back down in his spot. And my uncle, who'd just clocked that he'd been gone, did the dad thing, the relief coming out as anger thing. Started in on him. Where'd you go? Don't do that. You don't wander off out here in the dark. You scared me. What's the matter with you? And my cousin just sat there and smiled and didn't answer. Just sat in his spot by the fire and smiled and said nothing while his dad scolded him. And I knew. I need to be really careful how I say this part because it's the whole thing. It's the center of everything, and I've never found words that do it right, but I'll try. I knew it wasn't him. I didn't think it. I didn't reason my way to it. I knew it instantly, completely, from somewhere underneath thinking, the way you know a smell before you can name it. The way you know a face in a crowd is your mother before you've consciously seen her. The thing sitting in my cousin's spot by the fire looked exactly like my cousin. Exactly. It was wearing his clothes, his face, his body, his hair. It had come walking up out of the dark with his walk, his exact way of moving. And it was not him. And I knew it was not him with total certainty. And I was 10 years old and I could not say one single word. Because what does a 10-year-old say? What could I possibly say? That's not Danny. With Danny sitting right there in the firelight where everyone could see him, his own father talking to him. They'd have told me to hush. They'd have thought I was being weird, scared of the dark, acting out. There were no words I had that would not have gotten me told to hush. So I just stared at it. I couldn't do anything but stare at it. And it felt me staring. And it turned its head, slow, and it looked at me, right at me across the fire. And it kept smiling. And then while it looked at me, the smile changed. Just slightly. Just a little. And just for me, only for me, in a way the others couldn't see because they weren't looking and it was angled at me alone. The smile changed into something that was not a smile anymore. Something that was for me and me only, and what it said, that changed smile. What it communicated as clear as if it had spoken out loud was, yes, yes, you're right. And isn't that interesting? And what exactly are you going to do about it, little one? It knew that I knew. It looked right into me across that fire, and it let me see that it knew that I knew. And it was delighted. It was amused. It was a thing wearing my cousin's face, enjoying the private joke of the one person at the fire who could tell and could say nothing. And then it turned its head back to my uncle and answered some question in my cousin's exact voice, easy as anything. And my uncle relaxed, and the scolding wound down, and the moment closed up, and I was left alone on the far side of the fire with what I knew in no way on earth to say it. I don't know how long it sat there with us. It felt like hours. It was probably much less. Time doesn't work right inside a thing like that. I couldn't take my eyes off it, and I couldn't make a sound, frozen. A 10-year-old boy locked up solid with a terror he had no words for, watching a thing wear his cousin and warm its hands at the family fire. And then there was a sound out in the dark, from off in the direction the thing had first come walking from. And it was my cousin's voice, the real one, far off, thin, calling out, "Hey? Hey, where are you guys? I think I'm turned around. Where's the camp?" The exact sound of a 16-year-old who's wandered too far in the dark and gotten himself genuinely lost and is trying hard to keep the fear out of his voice and not quite managing it, calling for us scared from out in the black. And the thing at the fire went still. Everybody heard the voice from the dark. My dad and my uncle's heads came up, and I watched my uncle's face do something I have never been able to forget for the rest of my life. This slow, dawning, impossible horror, as he looked at the cousin sitting right there by the fire, and then turned his head toward the cousin's voice calling from the dark and back, and his mind just refused. You could watch it refuse to do the arithmetic, refused to hold both of those things at once, his son by the fire and his son lost in the dark, calling. And in that 1 second, while every head turned toward the voice in the dark, I was the only one still looking at the thing by the fire. And the thing by the fire stood up. And it did not stand up the way a person stands up. It came up off the ground, smooth, wrong, like it was being drawn up by a string from above, or pulled backward by something. No push from the legs. Just a smooth rising and a smooth gliding step back, and it stepped backward out of the firelight. 1 step, 2, smooth and wrong and silent, and the dark at the edge of the fire took it, and it was gone. Gone like it had never been. And I was the only one who saw it go, because everyone else was looking the other way, at the dark where the real voice was. And by the time their heads came back around to the fire, there was just an empty spot where my cousin had been sitting, and a confused scramble of the men grabbing flashlights and nobody but me understanding why the spot was empty. We found the real Danny. He'd genuinely gotten lost, wandered maybe a quarter mile off in the dark, and gotten his directions completely scrambled and panicked. And he was cold and shaken and so relieved to see the lights coming that he cried, which mortified him. And he had no idea, none, what we were talking about when it came up, the figure at the fire. He'd never come back. He'd been out in the dark the entire time, the whole 20 minutes and more, lost and getting more lost, while the thing wearing his face had sat at our fire and taken his father's scolding and smiled at me across the flames. He'd never been anywhere near the camp until we went out and brought him in. My uncle never spoke of it. Not that night, not ever. He shut it away the way some men shut things away, and it was understood that we did not talk about it. My dad, though. My dad, years and years later, near the end, when the sickness had loosened a lot of things in him, and the walls between things had gotten thin, he brought it up to me one time, out of nowhere, just the two of us. He said, "Quiet, you saw it too, didn't you? That night, at the fire." And I said yes. And he nodded, slow, like something he'd carried a long time had finally been set down, and he said, "I never told your mother." And we left it right there, the two of us. And that was the only time in my whole life my father ever once acknowledged that the thing had been real, that I hadn't dreamed it or imagined it as a scared little kid. And I hold on to that exchange like it's made of gold, because it means I'm not crazy, it means it happened. And because it means that one of the last real conversations I had with my dad was him reaching across all those years to tell me, without quite saying it, that he'd seen it too, and that I'd been right, and that he believed me. That's a strange and terrible and precious gift to get from your dying father. But I'll take it. I'll take it over not knowing. There's one more thing from years after that I've never told anybody, and it's the reason the old fear never fully let go of me. The reason I can't write this off as a scared kid's bad memory, no matter how much the grown man in me would like to. When my own son turned 10, about the age I'd been, my wife wanted to take him camping. A nice, safe family campground, the kind with bathrooms and a camp store, and other families 20 feet away on every side, nothing like the deep country I'd been in as a boy. And I tried. I want you to know I tried for my son, because I didn't want to hand him my fear, didn't want to be the dad who couldn't do a normal thing. I agreed to one night, and we went, and it was fine. It was genuinely fine. A nice evening, hot dogs, my boy happy as anything. And I started to think maybe I'd finally outrun it. And then, after dark, sitting around our little fire, with families and lantern light all around us, my son got up to go to the bathroom, the lit cinder block building maybe 100 feet off, in sight the whole way, and I watched him walk to it, watched him go in. And a couple minutes later, a boy came walking back from that direction toward our fire. My son's size, my son's clothes, my son's walk. And I felt the whole bottom drop out of the world. I felt myself become 10 years old again, instantly and completely. Because I was watching this boy come toward me out of the half dark. And I could not, for the life of me, in that moment, be sure. I sat there frozen, 40-some years old, a grown man at a family campground, absolutely rigid with the exact terror I'd felt across that fire in the deep woods, staring at a child walking toward me and not able to be sure it was my son, waiting for the smile to change, waiting for it to look at me and let me see that it knew that I knew. And it was my son. Of course it was my son. He walked up and said the bathroom had a huge moth in it, and sat back down and asked for a marshmallow, my boy. Completely my boy. Nothing wrong, nothing strange, just a kid who'd gone to the bathroom and come back. I gave him his marshmallow with a hand that wasn't steady, and I said something normal, and my wife didn't notice anything, and I sat there for the rest of that night with my heart slowly coming back down out of my throat, and I understood, finally and for good, that it had never really left me. That somewhere down underneath, I am still 10 years old and still at that fire, and that I will be, every time a loved one walks toward me out of the dark for the rest of my life, until I'm not anything anymore. We packed up the next morning and went home, and I have never tried again, and I never will. My son's grown now. He thinks his dad just doesn't like camping. Let him think it. I would rather he think his father is a homebody than ever sit him down and explain why, when you're far enough back in the dark, you have to be sure, and why being sure is the one thing that out there you can never quite be. I'm in my 40s now. I have never camped again, not once, and I never will. Not for anyone. Not for anything. And the thing I most need people to understand, the reason I'm finally sending this in after all these years, is this. It didn't try to hurt us. That's what haunts me worst of all. It didn't threaten anybody. It didn't attack. It didn't do one aggressive thing. It sat by a fire and wore a face and answered a father's questions in a borrowed voice. And the only living soul who knew anything was wrong was a 10-year-old boy who couldn't make his mouth work. And if Danny hadn't gotten himself lost, if Danny had just snuck off and smoked his cigarette and come right back, if the timing had been even a little bit different, then the real Danny would have walked back up to that fire to find the thing already sitting in his spot, or worse, the thing would have simply stayed, and it would have walked out of those woods with us. 3 days hike back to the truck, sleeping next to us, eating our food, being Danny. And I'd have been the only one who knew, a 10-year-old, the whole long way out, and for however long after, the only one who could tell, with no words anyone would believe. I have spent a lot of nights wondering what it would have done, where it would have gone, what it wanted, if it had made it out of those woods wearing my cousin. And I am more grateful than I have words for that my cousin got lost that night. Which is a strange thing to be grateful for, a boy's bad luck in the dark. But his getting lost and calling out is the only reason the thing went still and stood up wrong and let the dark take it back. And the only reason I don't have a much worse story to tell you. I never found out what it wanted. I'm very, very glad I never found out. Story 13. This will be the last thing I ever write about it, and once it's written, I am finished. I'm closing the door on it for good, and I'm sending it to you rather than to anyone I know, because you read these things out kindly and plainly, without making a circus of them, and because my own family is good and tired of hearing it, and I don't blame them one bit. A man can only ask the same people to carry the same weight so many times before it's a kindness to stop asking. So I'm setting it on a stranger, and on whoever listens, and then I'm done with it. That's the plan, anyway. We'll see if the door stays shut. It never has before. I was a hunting guide and backcountry outfitter for 30 years. The real article, not a man who runs day trips, I mean week-long horseback hunts deep into genuine wilderness, packing clients and gear, miles and miles back in the country. Most people will never see in their lives. It was a hard life and a good one, and I was very good at it. I'll say that plainly. No false modesty. I was among the best in my part of the country at what I did. I mention the 30 years and the skill of it for one reason, so that you'll weigh what I'm about to tell you accordingly. I have spent more nights under the open sky in deep, true wilderness than very nearly anyone alive today. Thousands of nights. Decades of them. Whatever there is out there in the far country to be seen, I have had more opportunity to see it than almost any man living. And in 30 years of it, 30 years of nights in the wild, high, lonesome places, I saw exactly one thing I cannot explain. One. Everything else, every strange sound and odd track and trick of the light over 30 years, I could account for. Because I knew that country and its creatures the way you know your own kitchen. One thing I could not account for. And I'm going to give it to you straight. No dressing it up. And then I'm going to let you do with it whatever you want. Because I have long since given up trying to do anything with it myself, except carry it. And I'm hoping that writing it out is a way of finally setting it down. It was the last night of a hunt. A good hunt, one of the good ones. 2 clients, both of them happy. Both with their animals taken clean and fair earlier in the week. Everybody in high spirits, the work essentially done. Just the pack out left in the morning. We were camped at a spot I'd used for the better part of 20 years. A high meadow beside a creek, with the mountains standing all around it in a ring. One of the most beautiful places I have ever known or ever will. A place I loved as much as I've loved in anywhere on this earth. I had slept in that meadow 100 nights across the years. More. I knew every sound it made in the dark, every way the creek talked, every place the wind came from. It was as familiar and as safe to me as my own bed. I woke in the deep middle of the night, the way you do sometimes for no reason you can name. Just up out of sleep all at once into the dark and the quiet. The fire was down to coals, a dull red. The 2 clients were asleep in their tent. The horses were quiet on the picket line, off at the edge of the meadow. And the moon was up, full, high, and bright, the way the moon gets full and enormous and clean in clear mountain air at altitude. Bright enough that the whole meadow was lit silver with it. Bright enough you could very nearly have read by it. Every blade of grass and every stone laid out in that cold silver light. And standing in the middle of the meadow, in the full moonlight, perfectly still, was a person, tall. And I'm going to tell you it was far, far taller than a person. And then I'm going to refuse to give you a number because you won't believe the number, and frankly, I half don't believe it myself. And the number isn't the point. It was tall enough that my mind, looking at it, simply refused for a long moment. Just refused to process it. The way a word goes meaningless if you stare at it too long. The way your eyes slide off a thing they can't accept. It stood out there in the open silver meadow, facing away from me, toward the mountains, its back to the camp, to me, and it was not moving. And I'll tell you, it was the stillness, even more than the size, that was wrong, that turned my blood to ice water where I lay. Because nothing alive is that still. Nothing. A deer standing frozen still flicks an ear, shifts its weight, breathes so you can see it. A man standing still sways, the tiny constant adjustments of a living body keeping its balance. Everything alive moves, always a little. It can't help it. That's what alive is. And this thing did not move at all. Not the smallest fraction. Not for as long as I watched it. And I watched it a long, long time, lying frozen in my bedroll with my heart slamming so hard I thought it would give me away, telling myself the whole time, the way you do, that it was a dead snag, a standing burnt tree, a trick of the moon on a boulder, a thing I'd simply never noticed in 20 years of sleeping in that exact meadow. Anything, any explanation, please, anything but what my eyes were telling me. And then the horses started. But here's the thing, and it's the thing that took the last of my comfort away. They did not spook. I know spooked horses. I have dealt with 1,000 spooked horses over 30 years. I know every sound and sign of it, the snorting, the stamping, the wall-eyed pulling against the picket, the readiness to bolt. This was not that. This was worse than that. The horses had all gone still, every one of them. And they had all turned, every single horse on that line, to face the thing standing in the meadow, turned to it, ears up and forward, locked on it, dead silent, not pulling, not stamping, not trying to flee, just standing rigid and silent and turned toward it as one. The whole line of them oriented to that single point in the meadow, like iron filings snapped around to a magnet, all of them staring at the exact thing I was staring at. And that, more than the size, more than the impossible stillness, is what broke something in me. What took away my last desperate handhold on it being a snag or a boulder or a trick of the light. Because a dead tree does not make every horse on the line turn and face it and go silent together. The horses saw it. The horses saw what I saw. It was real, it was there. And it was a thing the horses had no category for either. A thing that made them stop being horses for a while and become something that only knew how to stand and stare at the thing in the meadow. The same as me. I don't know how long it went on. Time wasn't working right, the way it doesn't inside real fear. And at some point, the thing in the meadow turned its head. Just the head, not the body. Slowly, smoothly. The head rotated, turning back over the shoulder, back toward the camp, back toward the picket line and the tents and the dying fire, back toward me, where I lay in the silver light, pretending with everything I had to be a sleeping shape on the ground. The head turned to look back at us, and I shut my eyes. I shut my eyes like a child, like a coward. I'm not ashamed of it anymore, though I was for years, because I understood in the instant before I shut them, with the same deep certainty that the snowplow fellow you might have read on here understood not to see the face under the hood. I understood that there are things you are not meant to see the face of. That to look at the face of that thing turning toward me in the moonlight would be to lose something I could not get back. My mind or my soul, or just my ability to ever again live an ordinary life. And so I shut my eyes, and I kept them shut. And I lay there in the silver dark, behind my own eyelids, and I prayed. I, who had not prayed in earnest in years, who'd let all that go a long time before. I prayed the oldest and simplest prayer there is, the only one that comes when you're past words, which is just please, 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 over and over, to whatever might be listening, please. And I kept my eyes shut, and I prayed, and I did not look, while the thing finished turning its head to consider the camp, and considered it for however long it considered it, with me lying there blind and praying not 10 steps from the picket line. And the light changed. After a long time, the quality of the dark against my closed eyelids changed, went from the cold silver of moonlight to the first thin gray of dawn, and I understood that I had lain there the rest of the night, not sleeping, not looking, eyes shut, praying until the night was simply over. And when at last I let myself open my eyes, the meadow was empty. Empty and ordinary, and going gold at the edges with the sunrise coming over the eastern ridge, the grass wet with dew, the creek talking the way it always talked, and the horses were grazing. Just grazing, calm, heads down, spread out across the meadow, eating breakfast like nothing in the world had ever happened, like the night had never been. And the two clients were stirring in their tent, and somebody needed to make the coffee. So I made the coffee. My hands were not steady, but I made it. And I broke that camp, and I packed those two happy clients and all our gear out the long miles to the trucks. And they tipped me well at the end and shook my hand and told me, both of them, that it had been the finest hunt of their lives, the trip of a lifetime. And they never knew a single thing about the night. Not one thing. I made certain of that. And I drove home. And within the year, I had sold my stock and my outfit and my whole operation, the work of my life, and I never guided again. And for a long time, I never told anyone the true reason why. I let them think I'd just gotten old and tired of the hard miles, which was even partly true, until I got old enough that being thought a fool stopped mattering to me at all. And I started now and then telling the truth. I have heard every explanation there is, and I have made every one of them myself at 3 a.m. over 30 years. A bear standing on its hind legs in the moonlight. A snag I genuinely never noticed. Sleep paralysis. A waking dream. The mind doing its tricks in the half place between sleeping and waking. I have wanted one of those explanations to be the true one more than you can possibly know. I have reached for them like a drowning man, every single one. And every time I come back to the horses, because a bear, a snag, a dream, a trick of my own tired mind, none of those things makes every horse on the picket line turn as one and face it and go silent and stare. The horses don't share my dreams. The horses don't see my sleep paralysis. The horses saw it. They saw the same thing I saw, and they turned to it and they went quiet. And that one fact has burned through every comfortable explanation I have ever tried to lay over the top of that night for 30 years, and left me with only the truth, which I'll give you now, plain, as the last thing I have to say about it. We're not alone out there. In the deep country, the far, high, lonesome places, we are not alone, and we never have been. Whatever else shares that country with us is patient, and it is quiet, and very nearly always it lets us pass right through its home without ever troubling us or showing itself. And we go our whole lives in and out of the wilderness and never know. But it is there. And once on one bright moonlit night, in a high meadow I loved more than almost any place on earth, one of them chose to stand up out of the dark and be seen, and to turn its head and look back at the small warm camp of men and horses sleeping in its meadow. And it was gracious enough, or perhaps only indifferent enough, or perhaps just not hungry enough that night, to let me keep my eyes shut and to leave us be, and to let me live to be an old man who sold his outfit and tells the story. I don't go to the mountains anymore. That part of my life is over, and I've made my peace with it. But I want to be clear that I don't curse them, and I don't fear them the way you might think, not exactly. It was their country first. It was their country a long, long time before it was ever ours, and it will be their country long after. I was only ever a guest in it, a welcome enough guest for 30 years, who stayed a great many nights, more than my share, and who finally, once on one silver night, Woke at the wrong hour and saw his host. That's all it was. I overstayed and I saw the one who'd been letting me stay. And it let me go. That's the whole of it. Thank you for reading An Old Man all the way to the end of it. I find now that it's down on the page and sent off, that I do feel something lift a little, which is more than I expected and maybe more than I deserve. Maybe the door stays shut this time. Maybe it doesn't. But it's yours now and theirs, everyone who hears it, and that's a few less nights I have to carry it all by myself. That's all the submissions for tonight. Thank you to every person who trusted this channel with their story, the hard ones especially. And thank you for listening all the way to the end. If something out there has ever made you stop and turn around and walk back toward the road, then you're in good company here. Stay safe in the backcountry, keep your wits about you, trust the older, deeper part of yourself that knows things before you do, and we'll see you in the next one. This has been Park Ranger Files.